The groom never entered the church. At first, no one dared to notice. Not properly. Not in the way society noticed things when it intended to destroy a woman. The chapel of St. Bartholomew's had been dressed for a wedding so grand that even the old stone walls seemed to hold their breath. White roses climbed the pillars, ivory ribbons trembled in the cold morning draught, candles burned along the aisle in disciplined rows, their flames soft and golden against the grey light spilling through the stained glass windows, and at the altar stood Lady Eleanor Whitmore, still, silent, beautiful in a gown that had taken 3 seamstresses 6 weeks to finish. The ivory silk fell around her like moonlight. Lace covered her shoulders. A delicate veil softened the proud line of her face. In her gloved hands she held a bouquet of white roses and myrtle, though the stems had begun to bend beneath the pressure of her fingers. She had been standing there long enough for the candles to burn lower, long enough for the vicar to clear his throat twice, long enough for the first whisper to move through the church, like a knife hidden inside velvet. Lord Julian Wycliffe was late. 10 minutes late could be forgiven. 15 could be explained. 20 became a question. 30 became a scandal. Eleanor kept her chin lifted, because that was what daughters of old families were taught to do when the floor began to crack beneath them. You did not tremble. You did not weep. You did not turn and look at the faces behind you. Even when you could feel every eye fastening itself to your back, her mother, Lady Mary Ann Whitmore, sat in the front pew, pale beneath her hat of dove-grey silk. She leaned towards Sir Edmund Whitmore and whispered something Eleanor could not hear. Her father did not answer. Sir Edmund's face had gone the colour of old parchment. His hands, which had once held the reins of Whitmore Hall with pride, now gripped his cane as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. Eleanor saw it from the corner of her eye, the fear, not merely embarrassment, not merely wounded pride, fear. Her father knew what this marriage meant. They all knew. The Wycliffe settlement was not just a union between 2 families. It was the last wall standing between the Whitmores and ruin. Their estate was mortgaged. Their creditors had grown bold. Their name, once polished and respected, had begun to gather cracks beneath the surface, and Lord Julian Wycliffe, charming, golden, admired Julian, had promised to mend it all by marrying Eleanor before the county. But the place beside her remained empty. Behind her someone coughed. A lady's fan snapped open. Another whisper followed. The church did not gasp, it fed. Eleanor heard the faint rustle of silk as women leaned close to one another. She heard the careful shifting of gentlemen in polished boots. She heard a soft laugh quickly swallowed and hidden behind a gloved hand. Her younger sister, Clara, sat beside their mother with tears shining in her eyes. Poor Clara, only 7, too young to understand how quickly one woman's disgrace could stain the future of another. Eleanor wanted to look at her, wanted to smile, even faintly to say without words that all would be well, but she could not turn. If she turned, they would see her face, and if they saw her face, they might see the first fracture in her composure, so she stared ahead at the vicar. The vicar stared back with the strained helplessness of a man who had been trained to speak of eternity, but not of abandoned brides. Then the doors opened. Every head turned. Hope, sharp and humiliating, struck Eleanor so suddenly that her breath caught. For one foolish second, she thought Julian had arrived. She imagined him hurrying down the aisle with that apologetic smile of his. She imagined the murmurs softening. She imagined him taking his place beside her, laughing gently about some broken carriage wheel, some mistaken hour, some absurd delay that would become amusing by supper. But it was not Julian, it was a footman. A Wycliffe footman. He stood at the entrance with his hat clutched in his hands and his face drawn tight with dread. In one hand, he held a sealed letter. The seal was unmistakable, dark the Wycliffe crest, a falcon with spread wings. For a moment, no one moved. Then the footman began his walk down the aisle, slowly, painfully. Each step sounded louder than it should have. Eleanor felt her mother stiffen. Her father rose halfway, then sank back down as if his legs could not bear the truth before his mind had heard it. The footman stopped before the vicar and bowed. "My lord's message," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The vicar took the letter. His fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. The chapel held itself in dreadful silence. Eleanor stared at the folded paper. She already knew. A woman often knew ruin before it was named. The vicar opened the letter and read silently at first. His mouth tightened, his face changed. Not with surprise, with pity. Eleanor hated him for that. Lady looked at her. Her name trembled in the air. She did not move. Read it. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. The vicar swallowed. Then he read aloud. "Forgive me, I cannot proceed. Lady Isolde Ravenshoe is in desperate need of me. Her condition is grave, and I cannot abandon her in such suffering. I never meant to wound you, Eleanor, but my heart has been claimed elsewhere than honor allowed me to admit. I pray you will one day understand, Julian." Silence. Then the church changed. Not loudly. No, the reaction came softly. A sharp breath here, a whisper there. A cruel little movement of a fan, a gentleman lowering his head, not in sympathy but to hide the satisfaction of witnessing another family's fall. Lady Isolde Ravenshaw. The name passed through the chapel without being spoken. Everyone knew her. Beautiful Isolde. Delicate Isolde. The woman Julian had once loved before family pressure, debts, and alliances turned his eyes toward Eleanor Whitmore, and now, on the morning of his wedding, he had gone to her. Not sent for a doctor, not sent for his brother, not delayed with explanation. Gone. Eleanor stood beneath the white roses and felt every dream of her future fall from her shoulders like torn lace. She did not love Julian with the madness poets praised, but she had trusted him, she had believed him decent. She had believed that when a man gave his word before family, church, and society, he meant to keep it. Now his absence spoke more clearly than any vow he had ever made. Her mother made a small broken sound. Sir Edmund closed his eyes. Clara began to cry openly. That was when the whispers sharpened. Poor thing, Whitmore Hall is finished now. Did she know? How dreadful. How expected. That last whisper reached Eleanor like a slap. How expected, as though her humiliation had been waiting in the wings all along. As though she had merely arrived on time for her own destruction. The vicar folded the letter with shaking hands. Lady Eleanor, he said softly, perhaps we should retire to the vestry, retire, hide, disappear, allow the guests to leave with their hunger satisfied. Allow the story to gallop across the county before the wedding breakfast had even gone cold. Lady Eleanor Whitmore, abandoned at the altar. Lady Eleanor Whitmore, whose groom ran to another woman. Lady Eleanor Whitmore, whose family debts exposed to every creditor with ears. She saw it all in an instant. By nightfall, her father's creditors would know the marriage settlement had failed. By tomorrow, Clara's prospects would be whispered over tea. By the end of the week, every invitation to Whitmore Hall would vanish beneath polite excuses. A woman could be ruined in many ways, but public abandonment was among the cleanest. It required no evidence, only witnesses. And the chapel was full of them. Eleanor's fingers loosened around the bouquet. One white rose fell. It struck the stone floor at her feet. The sound was almost nothing, yet it felt like the final bell. Then someone rose from the front pew. Not her father, not a friend, not any gentleman who had smiled at her family over supper and promised everlasting respect. Viscount Alistair Wycliffe stood. The church became still again. This silence was different. This silence had weight. Alistair Wycliffe was Julian's older brother. And everything Julian was, Alistair was not. Julian was golden charm. Alistair was winter steel. Julian laughed easily. Alistair was said to make men confess debts with a single look. Julian collected admiration. Alistair collected obedience. He was dressed in severe black, cut perfectly to his tall frame. His dark hair was brushed back from a face too controlled to be called handsome in the ordinary way. There was handsomeness there, yes, but it was the kind one noticed with caution. Sharp cheekbones, a firm mouth, eyes dark and unreadable beneath strong brows. The ruthless Viscount. That was what they called him when they thought he could not hear. The man creditors feared. The man tenants obeyed. The man mothers did not place beside delicate daughters unless they wished those daughters to learn how silence could be more dangerous than flirtation. He stepped into the aisle. No one stopped him. No one would have dared. He walked toward Eleanor beneath the arch of white roses, his expression cold enough to silence pity itself. The fallen rose lay between them. Alistair looked down at it once, then at her. For the first time that morning, Eleanor felt seen by someone who was not devouring her shame. His gaze did not pity her, it did not accuse, it did not ask whether she had been foolish enough to believe Julian, it simply met hers, as if the rest of the church had vanished and only the ruin remained between them. Lady Eleanor, he said. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried to every corner of the chapel. She forced herself to answer, "My lord." A murmur passed through the guests, but it died when Alistair turned his head slightly. Only slightly, that was all it took. The church remembered its manners. Alistair looked back at the vicar. "My brother has disgraced your office, this church, and the lady before you." The vicar blinked. No one breathed. Alistair continued. "He has also endangered 2 families through cowardice dressed as sentiment." Eleanor's heart struck hard against her ribs. Cowardice. No one else had dared call it that. No one else had defended her with the truth. Her mother's tears stopped. Her father opened his eyes. Alistair turned back to Eleanor. His face did not soften, but his voice lowered. "I cannot undo what Julian has done." The words should have broken her. Instead, they were honest. Not comfort, not performance. Truth. "But I can prevent them from making a feast of it," he said. Eleanor looked at him. She did not understand. Neither did anyone else. Then Alistair Wycliffe, ruthless Viscount of a house that never begged and rarely explained, did the one thing no one in that church expected. He stepped closer, and before the altar where his brother should have stood, he said, "Marry me instead." The words struck the chapel like thunder. A sound moved through the pews, not a gasp, a wave. Her father whispered her name. Clara covered her mouth. The vicar stared as if Alistair had asked him to rewrite scripture. Eleanor could not move. Marry me instead, not hide, not flee. not wait for society's mercy. Marry me. Stand where they cannot reach you. She searched Alistair's face for mockery. There was none. For warmth. There was none of that either, but there was certainty, a terrible, unshakable certainty. He was not asking because he had been overcome by romance. He was not a man given to dramatic impulses. That made the offer more shocking, more dangerous, more real. Eleanor's thoughts raced. If she refused, she left this church as an abandoned bride. If she accepted, she became the wife of the most feared man in the county. A stranger, a Wycliffe, Julian's brother. The scandal would not disappear. Nothing could make it disappear, but it would change shape. No longer would society speak only of the bride left unwanted. They would have to speak of the Viscount who claimed her before the witnesses could bury her. Eleanor looked at her father. Sir Edmund's face held agony, and hope he did not dare show. She looked at her mother. Lady Marianne was crying silently now, one gloved hand pressed to her lips. Then Eleanor looked at Clara. Her sister's future sat trembling in those tears. Eleanor understood then that survival did not always arrive gently. Sometimes it arrived dressed in black, with a cold voice and an impossible offer. Alistair remained before her. He did not extend his hand. He did not pressure her with touch. He simply waited. More than anything, steadied her. He had given her a choice in a room where everyone else had taken something from her. Her pride, her safety, her future, her name. Eleanor bent slowly and picked up the fallen rose. The stem had snapped. The bloom remained intact. She held it with the others. Then she lifted her chin, not because she was unafraid, but because fear had already taken enough. She turned to the vicar. The old man's lips parted, but no words came. Eleanor's voice trembled when it did not break. Proceed. The chapel froze. Alistair's eyes changed. Only for a moment, so briefly that no one else might have noticed, but Eleanor saw it, a flicker behind the severity. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Something deeper. Something almost like pain. Then he stepped into the place his brother had abandoned. The vicar gathered himself, though his hands still shook. The guests leaned forward as if history itself had shifted beneath them, and Lady Eleanor Whitmore, who had entered the church that morning to marry one brother, stood before God, family, and every merciless eye in the county beside another. The ruthless one, the feared one, the one no woman dared mock. Twice as the ceremony began, Eleanor felt the world she had known closing behind her like a door. She did not know why Viscount Alistair Wycliffe had saved her. She did not know what price would come with his name. She did not know whether she had stepped out of ruin or into something far more dangerous. But when Alistair's voice answered the vows, low and unwavering, one truth settled over the chapel with the weight of fate. Julian had left her at the altar. His brother had given her a name no one could mock. And before Eleanor fully understood what she had agreed to become, the abandoned bride was no longer Lady Eleanor Whitmore. She was Viscountess Wycliffe. Rain began before the wedding breakfast could be cancelled. It came first as a whisper against the chapel windows, then as a steady grey curtain over the churchyard, washing the white carriage ribbons until they clung limply to the horses' bridles. Society did not leave St. Bartholomew's quietly. It scattered, not from grief, from excitement. Ladies gathered their skirts and hurried beneath umbrellas, already carrying the story in their mouths like a sweet they could not wait to taste. Gentlemen bent their heads together beneath polished hats, speaking in low tones that pretended to be solemn but were not. By nightfall, every drawing-room within 20 miles would know Lord Julian Wycliffe had fled his own wedding. Lady Eleanor Whitmore had been abandoned at the altar, and then Julian's feared elder brother, Viscount Alistair Wycliffe, had risen from the pews and married her instead. No one would tell it gently. No one ever told a woman's humiliation gently when it could be told beautifully. Inside the church, Eleanor stood beside her new husband and felt the weight of his name settle over her shoulders. Viscountess Wycliffe. The title had been spoken over her only minutes before, yet it felt unreal, like a cloak placed upon a drowning woman. Heavy, necessary, not yet warm. The ceremony had ended with the vicar's trembling blessing. Her mother had embraced her with tears she tried to hide. Her father had bowed his head over Eleanor's hand and whispered, "Forgive me," though she did not know whether he meant for the debts, the arrangement, or the fact that his daughter had just saved the family by surrendering her future to a stranger. Clara had clung to her. For one moment, Eleanor had almost broken. Not because of Julian, no, that wound had already turned cold. It was Clara's face that nearly undid her. Her younger sister looked at her as if Eleanor had stepped into the path of a carriage to save them all. Perhaps she had. Perhaps the carriage had merely been called marriage. Then Alistair's voice cut through the room, low, controlled. "Final, my carriage is waiting." That was all. No tender announcement, no public display, no attempt to soften the absurdity of what had happened. He simply offered Eleanor his arm, and every person in the chapel watched to see whether the abandoned bride would take it. Eleanor looked at him. His black coat was immaculate, his expression unreadable. Rain-dark light from the chapel windows made his face seem carved from something sterner than flesh. This was the man she had married. Not Julian, who smiled when he lied. Not Julian, who loved comfort more than courage, but Alistair. The brother society feared because he did not beg to be liked. Eleanor placed her gloved hand upon his arm. The whispers stopped, only for a moment, but she felt the power of it. Alistair did not hurry her down the aisle. He walked at a measured pace, slow enough that she did not seem dragged, firm enough that no one could mistake her departure for flight. The guests parted before them, a sea of silk, a wall of eyes. Eleanor saw Lady Hartwell's astonished face, Lord Blackwood's lifted brow, Mrs. Penrith's open hunger for scandal. Every gaze pierced her veil. Searching for tears, for shame, gave them nothing. Not because she was strong, because Alistair's arm beneath her hand did not tremble. And somehow that steadiness lent itself to her. At the church doors, the rain struck cold against her face. The world beyond the chapel smelled of wet stone, crushed roses and mud. The Wycliffe carriage stood waiting. Black, tall, severe. A footman opened the door at once. Before Eleanor could gather her wet skirts, Alistair stepped down from the church threshold and turned back. He did not speak. He simply offered his hand. Eleanor hesitated. Not because the gesture was improper. It was not. A husband helping his wife into a carriage was ordinary. But there was nothing ordinary about this moment. His gloved hand waited between them. Broad, still, patient around them. The guests pretended not to look. While looking at nothing else, Eleanor placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers with careful restraint. Not possessive, not tender, steady. He guided her into the carriage as though the rain, the scandal, the church, and the entire county's opinion were minor inconveniences he had already dismissed. When he entered after her, the door shut. The sound felt like a verdict. For several seconds, neither of them. The carriage moved. Iron wheels rolled over wet gravel. The chapel slipped away behind them. Eleanor sat with her hands folded in her lap, her ruined bouquet resting beside her. The flowers had survived the ceremony badly. Several petals had fallen, one stem was broken. White rose heads bowed toward the carriage floor. She stared at them because she did not yet know how to look at her husband. Her husband, the word struck strangely. An hour ago, she had expected to belong legally to Julian Wycliffe. Now she sat opposite Julian's elder brother, married to a man whose face revealed nothing. Rain streamed down the carriage windows. The sound filled the silence between them. At last, Alistair spoke. "No one in my household will refer to what happened today without consequence." Eleanor lifted her eyes. That was not what she had expected. She had expected a colder statement, perhaps a practical instruction, perhaps an explanation, perhaps even regret, but not protection. She studied him across the dimmer ridge. "You cannot command all of England into silence, my lord." "No," he said. "Only those foolish enough to speak within reach of me." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Eleanor looked back toward the rain-blurred glass. A strange, dangerous breath moved through her chest. It was not relief, exactly. Relief would have been too simple. This was something sharper. The first small awareness that she was no longer entirely undefended. After a moment, she said, "You did not have to do it." Alistair's gaze remained on her. "I know." Those two words unsettled her more than a speech would have done. He knew. He had not been trapped by impulse. He had chosen. The question fell between them, fragile and immense. The carriage rocked over a rut in the road. Alistair's gloved hand tightened once around the head of his cane. "Because Julian made a public disgrace of private weakness," he said, "and because that disgrace would have destroyed more than your pride." Eleanor's throat tightened. "My pride is not, so it is not." She looked at him again. There it was. That same strange refusal to pity her. It should have made him seem cruel. Instead, it made her feel less small. Alistair continued. "Your father's creditors would have moved before sunset. Your sister's prospects would have suffered by morning. Your mother would have been forced to endure condolence visits from women who came only to count the damage." Eleanor's fingers curled. "You speak as though you had already considered every consequence." "I had." The answer chilled her. "You expected Julian to fail me." A pause. Too brief to be denial. "I expected Julian to be Julian," Alistair said. The words were quiet, but beneath them lived an old exhaustion. Eleanor turned her face away. There it was, the first shadow. He had known something. Perhaps not that Julian would run to Isolde, perhaps not the exact shape of the abandonment, but he had known enough to come prepared, to rise without hesitation, to offer his name as though the thought had not first appeared to him at the altar. The rain beat harder. Eleanor watched the road vanish beneath the wheels and wondered whether she had escaped one betrayal only to step into a colder design. Wycliffe House appeared at dusk. It stood at the end of a long avenue of black elms, its stone facade stood against the storm-dark sky. Not a house built for charm, a house built for endurance. Tall windows glowed with amber light. Chimneys rose like watchmen. The entrance was framed by columns darkened by rain. Servants waited beneath the portico in disciplined lines. No one whispered. That was the first thing Eleanor noticed. Not one servant glanced too long at her wedding gown. Not one exchanged a look. The door opened before the carriage fully stopped. Alistair descended first. Again he turned and offered his hand. Eleanor took it this time. There were no guests to watch, only servants, and the enormous dark house that was now hers. "My lady," said the butler, bowing deeply. He was a tall, silver-haired man with a controlled face and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Graves," Alistair said. "Lady Wycliffe is mistress of this house. Her instructions are to be treated as mine." The butler bowed again. "Of course, my lord." Alistair removed his gloves slowly. "And if any member of staff finds today's event suitable for gossip, they may find employment elsewhere before breakfast." The hall went still. No one moved. No one even breathed loudly. Eleanor looked at him. There was no anger in his tone. No threat for performance, only certainty. Mr. Graves inclined his head. "The household understands, my lord. See that it continues to." Then Alistair turned to Eleanor. "You will be shown to your rooms. Dinner can be sent up or served below, as you prefer." Her rooms, not their rooms. The distinction entered her quietly. He had made it for her sake. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt suddenly and terribly alone. The house stretched around her in polished darkness, black and white marble beneath her feet. Oil portraits above the staircase, ancestral faces watching from gilded frames with a solemn disapproval of the dead. The air smelled faintly of beeswax, old books, rain-soaked wool, and extinguished fires. Everything here was controlled, even silence. A maid led Eleanor upstairs to a chamber prepared with a fire already burning. The room was grand but severe. Heavy curtains, a carved bed, a writing desk near the window, a mirror framed in dark wood. On the dressing table lay fresh linen, a tray of tea, and a small silver bell. Eleanor stood in the center of the room while the maid carefully removed her veil. The pins came out one by one. With each pin, the day loosened its grip. When the veil finally fell away, Eleanor saw herself a stranger. Her face was pale, her eyes too bright, her hair still dressed beautifully beneath its pins, as if beauty could survive humiliation without becoming tragic. "My lady?" the maid asked gently. "Shall I help you change?" Eleanor looked at the wedding gown, the gown meant for Julian, for a life that no longer existed. "Yes," she said. Her voice sounded distant. "Please." By the time she entered Alistair's library later that evening, she wore a simple gown of deep blue silk, provided by the housekeeper. It was not bridal. It did not mock her with white. For that she was grateful. The library was the warmest room she had yet seen. A fire burned high in the grate. Shelves of leather-bound books climbed the walls. A large mahogany desk stood near the window, covered with ledgers, letters, and a silver paper knife. Alistair stood by the mantel, one hand resting against the stone. He had changed as well. His black coat remained severe, but the dampness of the day was gone from him. In the firelight, his face seemed less carved, more human, though no less guarded. He turned. "Lady Wycliffe." The name struck her again. She closed the door behind Lord. A faint pause. Then he said, "Alistair will do when we are alone." Eleanor held his gaze. Something shifted in the room. Not softness, not yet, but acknowledgement. He gestured toward a chair near the fire. She sat. He did not sit until she had settled. Another small courtesy. Another detail she did not want to notice. For several moments, the only sound was the fire. Then Eleanor said, "I need to know what this marriage is." Alistair sat opposite her. "What I mean, I know." His honesty was becoming difficult to defend against. Eleanor folded her hands tightly in her lap. "I will not live as a charity case in your house." His eyes sharpened. "And I will not be pitied, and I will not be used to punish your brother." At that silence returned. The fire snapped. Alistair looked into the flames for a moment before answering. "My brother requires no assistance in punishing himself." It was the first nearly human thing he had said all day. Not kind, but weary. "Then why am I here?" He looked back at her. "Because you chose to proceed." She almost laughed. "Not from amusement, from the bitter absurdity of choice. In front of half the county, with my family's ruin waiting outside the church door." "Yes," he said. "A poor choice." Eleanor's breath caught. She wanted to be offended. Instead, she found herself strangely grateful that he had not dressed necessity as romance. Alistair leaned back slightly. "I will make the position clear. You will remain publicly as my wife for 1 year. During that time, the Wycliffe name will protect you from the worst of today's scandal. Your father's most immediate financial dangers will be contained. Your sister will not suffer for Julian's conduct." Eleanor's heart tightened. "My father's dangers," she repeated. Alistair said nothing. "Enough. Enough is not an answer." "No," he said. "It is not." She stared at him. This man could be infuriating without lifting his voice. He continued before she could press him further. "In return, I ask that you appear beside me when necessary. You will be recognized as Viscountess Wycliffe. You will receive callers, attend select events, and allow society no satisfaction in imagining you broken. And after 1 year, if you wish for a separate life, it will be arranged quietly, respectably, without public injury to you." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they landed like a second abandonment waiting politely in the future. A 1-year marriage, a bargain, a shield with an expiration date. Eleanor looked down at her hands. The wedding ring glowed faintly. Julian's ring, Alistair's. Why 1 year? She asked. Because society has a short memory when denied fresh blood. She looked up. That is a grim way to describe people we must dine with. It is an accurate one. A silence, then unexpectedly Eleanor smiled faintly. It vanished almost at once, but he saw it. His gaze moved to her mouth, then away. The room became warmer, or perhaps Eleanor only noticed the fire. She drew a careful breath. And what of you, my lord? What do you gain from this bargain? Closed again. The Wycliffe name remains intact. That cannot be all. It is enough. Not for a man who married at an altar meant for his brother. His eyes met hers for a moment. Something lived between them that neither could name. Then he said, "You are tired." It was not an answer, it was a retreat. Eleanor rose. "Do not dismiss me when my questions inconvenience you." Alistair stood at once. He was taller than she remembered from the church, or perhaps here, in the firelit library, with rain tapping against the windows. The am not felt more dangerous. "You are avoiding me." "Yes." The blunt admission startled her into silence. He looked at her steadily. "There are answers that will do neither of us good tonight." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Because they are cruel, because they are not simple." Outside, thunder rolled far beyond the house. Eleanor felt suddenly aware of everything. The storm, the fire, the fact that she stood alone in a locked library with the man who had saved her. Reputation, and refused to explain his heart. Not that she believed his heart was involved. No, she would not be foolish twice in one day. "Then let us keep to what is simple." "Very well. I will honor the public arrangement. I will not embarrass your house. I will not beg affection from a man who married me out of duty." Alistair's expression changed barely enough. "Duty," he repeated. He took one slow step closer, not too close. Never too close, but close enough that she felt the force of his attention. "Call it protection if you must. Call it strategy. Call it pity." Eleanor's voice softened despite herself. "Is that not what it is?" "No," he answered too quickly. Then his voice lowered. "Pity is for those who look down." The fire crackled. Rain traced trembling lines down the glass. Alistair held her gaze as if the words cost him something. "I have never looked down at you, Lady Wycliffe." For a moment Eleanor could not speak. It was not a declaration, it was not tenderness. But something in it reached her where flattery never had. Julian had praised her beauty often, her grace, her suitability, her calm nature. He had never once spoken as if he saw the effort beneath it. Alistair had known her one day as his wife, and somehow he had named the one indignity she could not bear, to be looked down upon. Her eyes stung. She turned away before he could see. "I am tired," she said. This time the words were true. Alistair stepped back at once. "Of course." He crossed to the door and opened it for her himself. The corridor beyond was dim and quiet. Before she passed him, Eleanor paused. 1 year, he replied. "And after that, I am free to choose?" His jaw tightened. Yes. She searched his face. There was no triumph there, no satisfaction, only that same guarded severity. As if he had built his entire life around not asking for what might be refused. Eleanor inclined her head. "Good night, Alistair." His name felt strange on her tongue. His eyes darkened. "Good night, Eleanor." She left him standing in the library doorway. The corridor seemed longer on the return to her room. A footman bowed as she passed. A maid curtsied. No one stared, no one whispered. Alistair's command had worked. Or perhaps his household feared him enough to make kindness indistinguishable from discipline. When Eleanor reached the turn in the staircase, she heard voices below. Servants' voices, soft, careless, not meant for her. "She was meant for Lord Julian," one whispered. "Hush! But his lordship was ready, was he not, mister?" Graves said the carriage had been ordered before the letter even came. Eleanor stopped. Her fingers tightened on the banister. Another voice answered lower. "They say Lord Alistair expected his brother to fail her." A silence. Then the first voice murmured, "Then perhaps today was not as sudden as it seemed." The words struck Eleanor colder than rain. She stood very still in the shadow of the staircase. The great house breathed around her. Dark wood, polished floors, portraits watching, a new name on her hand, a bargain in her future. And beneath it all a question sharpened like a blade. How much had Alistair Wycliffe known before he ever rose from that pew? Eleanor looked down at the ring on her finger. It no longer felt like a rescue. It felt like a key or a lock. She continued up the stairs without making a sound. Behind her, Wycliffe House settled into silence. But in that silence, Eleanor understood one thing clearly. A disgrace had ended at the altar. Her marriage had only begun. Lady Hartwell's ballroom was not merely a room. It was a court of judgment dressed in candlelight. 300 candles burned in crystal chandeliers above a polished floor so bright reflected every silk slipper, every gloved hand. Every smile sharpened carefully enough to wound without leaving evidence. Music drifted through the air, violins, a pianoforte. The soft, disciplined rhythm of society pretending to be graceful while waiting for someone to bleed. And that night, society had come for Lady Eleanor Wycliffe, not Lady Eleanor Whitmore, not the abandoned bride of St. Bartholomew's. Not the poor creature left standing beneath white roses while Lord Julian Wycliffe ran to another woman. No, tonight she entered as Viscountess Wycliffe, but the Ton had not forgiven her for surviving. They had expected tears. They had expected withdrawal. They had expected her to remain hidden at Wycliffe House for weeks, perhaps months, until scandal softened into pity and pity into permanent damage. Instead, only 4 days after the wedding that had shocked the county, Eleanor stood at the top of Lady Hartwell's grand staircase with Alistair Wycliffe beside her. The ballroom saw her, and the ballroom changed. Conversation faltered first near the musicians, then along the refreshment tables, then by the fireplace where old ladies sat like queens of a kingdom built from memory, gossip, and judgment. Fans' lowered heads turned. A smile froze on one woman's mouth. A gentleman forgot the sentence he had been saying. The abandoned bride had returned. But she had not returned alone. Alistair stood at her right side, dressed in immaculate black evening attire, his cravat white and severe, his expression calm enough to make every whisper feel childish. He did not smile, he did not announce himself, he did not perform power. He simply possessed it. Eleanor's gloved hand rested lightly on his arm. Beneath the silk of her glove, her fingers felt cold, not from fear, not entirely from the knowledge that every person in that room remembered the church. They remembered the late groom, the letter, the vicar's trembling voice. They remembered Alistair's words, "Marry me instead." And now they waited to see whether the bride who had accepted him would shrink beneath the weight of her new name. Eleanor had dressed carefully. Not in white, never in white, not tonight. She wore deep ivory and silver, the shade chosen not to resemble bridal innocence but polished moonlight. The bodice was modest, the sleeves elegant, the embroidery fine enough to be noticed only by those who understood expense. A silver ribbon rested at her waist, pearls glimmered at her throat. She looked neither mournful nor triumphant. That was deliberate. Mourning would feed them. Triumph would provoke them. Dignity would deny them. Alistair leaned slightly toward her, his voice low enough that only she heard. "Breathe." Eleanor did not look at him. "I am breathing." "No," he said, "you are preparing for battle." Her mouth almost moved into a smile. Almost. "Is there a difference? In battle one may retreat." She looked ahead at the ballroom. Not from this. Something in his silence told her he understood. Then he placed his free hand over hers, only for one. A touch so brief no one else could make a story of it, but Eleanor felt the steadiness of him. The same steadiness from the carriage, from the church, from the library where he had promised 1 year and no pity. Then Lady Hartwell approached. She was a woman in her late 50s, magnificently dressed in violet silk with diamonds at her throat and a reputation for turning social cruelty into art. Her expression was all welcome, her eyes were all examination. "Lord Wycliffe," she said, dipping her head. "Lady Wycliffe, how pleased we are that you could attend." The pause before Eleanor's titles was small. Alistair noticed it. Of course he did. "Lady Hartwell," he said, "your invitation was kind." His voice made the word kind sound like a test. Lady Hartwell smiled more brightly. "Society has been most eager to welcome your bride." There it was, the first blade, your bride, not Lady Wycliffe, not the Viscountess. A woman still being measured by the scandal of how she had become a wife. Eleanor lifted her chin. "How generous of society," she said gently. "It so rarely waits to be generous until one is present." Lady Hartwell's fan stilled. For one breath, surprise crossed her face, then admiration. Or something close to it. Alistair's mouth did not change. But Eleanor felt him look at her. Lady Hartwell inclined her head. "I see marriage has agreed with you, Lady Wycliffe. It has given me an excellent view of character," Eleanor replied. A silence. Then Lady Hartwell laughed softly, not kindly, but respectfully. "Then you must allow me to present you again to the room." "I believe the room has already presented itself to me," Eleanor said. Alistair's hand remained steady beneath hers. Together, they descended the staircase step by step into the center of judgment. The whispers began again, as they always did, but they were quieter now. More careful, no one dared laugh openly, not with Alistair Wycliffe beside her. That was the first change Eleanor noticed before she had been prey. At the church, every gaze had landed on her with hunger. Tonight, those same gazes stopped short at Alistair's presence, as though there were an invisible line around her. A boundary drawn not in ink, but in consequence. No one crossed it. An elderly baronet bowed deeply. A young lady curtsied too quickly. Two gentlemen who had been smirking near the card-room suddenly found the ceiling fascinating when Alistair's eyes passed over them. Eleanor should have felt grateful. Instead, she felt exposed in a different way. Protection had its own weight. To be shielded was not the same as being free, yet when she caught Mrs. Penrith whispering behind a fan and saw the woman go pale as Alistair turned his head, Eleanor could not deny the satisfaction that moved quietly through her chest. The Ton had come to witness her ruin. Instead, they were learning the cost of repeating it. Near the musicians, Lady Rosamond Hartwell greeted Eleanor with a softness her mother did not possess. "Lady Wycliffe," she said warmly. "You look very well, thank you," Eleanor answered. There was no hidden cruelty in Lady Rosamond's voice. that almost undid her more than the cruelty would have. Kindness, when one had been braced for pain, could be dangerous. Before Eleanor could say more, a ripple pined of silence, not the silence of judgment, the silence of spectacle. Alistair's posture changed first, only slightly, but Eleanor felt it through his arm. She followed his gaze. Lord Julian Wycliffe had entered the ballroom. He looked exactly as he should not have looked. Handsome, golden, perfectly dressed. The sort of man society was always eager to forgive because his face made wrongdoing seem like confusion. He paused near the entrance, and for the first time since the church, Eleanor saw him clearly. Not as the man who had left her, not as the future she had lost, but as a man who had expected consequences to be smaller than his feelings. His eyes found her almost at once. He froze. Eleanor felt it across the room, his shock. He had expected something else, a pale woman, a wounded woman. A woman perhaps still carrying the shape of humiliation in her shoulders. Instead, she stood beside his brother in silver and ivory, titled, composed, and watched by every person who had believed she would disappear. Julian's face changed. Regret entered it, then confusion, then something that looked dangerously like longing. Eleanor's stomach tightened, not from love, from anger that arrived too late to be useful. He began walking toward her. The room pretended not to notice. The entire room noticed. Alistair did not move, but the air around him seemed to cool. Julian stopped before them and bowed. "My lord," he said to his brother. Alistair inclined his head once. Julian, no warmth, no open anger, worse. Indifference sharpened into ceremony. Julian, he turned to Eleanor. Eleanor, it was one word. Her name, spoken as if he still had the right to use it before society, as if she was still the woman he had left beneath the roses, as if his absence had not altered the laws between them. Eleanor's gloved fingers tightened around her fan. Before she could answer, Alistair spoke. "You will address my wife as Lady Wycliffe." The ballroom froze. The musicians faltered only for a second, but everyone heard. Julian's face flushed. Eleanor felt the words move through the room like a candle dropped into dry straw. "My wife, not the woman you abandoned, not the bride you shamed." Alistair did not raise his voice. Men like him did not need to. Julian glanced around. Seeing all the witnesses, he could no longer charm away. Then he bowed again.
"Lower this time, Lady Wycliffe."
Eleanor held his gaze. "Lord Julian." A small correction, a necessary one. "Not Julian, never Julian again." His expression tightened. "I had hoped to speak with you." Alistair answered before Eleanor could. "You are speaking." Julian looked at his brother with a flash of irritation privately. "No." Word fell cleanly. No explanation, no apology. Julian's mouth parted, then closed. Eleanor should have resented being answered for. But Julian had asked for privacy, as though privacy had not been the very place where he hid every weakness until it became public ruin. She turned to him. "There is nothing you may say to me now that cannot survive a room of witnesses." A murmur rippled. Julian looked wounded. The sight might once have moved her. "I never intended to hurt you," he said softly. Eleanor's eyes did not leave his. "That is the privilege of careless people, Lord Julian. They expect intention to repair consequence." His face paled. Alistair's arm remained still beneath her hand, but she felt the faintest shift in him. Approval? Surprise? She did not know. Julian looked as if he wished to say more, but the room had already taken too much interest. He bowed stiffly and stepped back. For the first time that evening, Eleanor felt the balance change, not entirely, but enough. The room had seen Julian humbled, quietly, publicly. Not destroyed, corrected, and Eleanor had not wept. That mattered. In society, composure was not merely behavior, it was currency, and tonight, Eleanor had spent it well. A few minutes later, the musicians began a waltz. Couples moved toward the floor, grateful for motion after tension. Eleanor expected Alistair to escort her away from the center of attention. Instead, he looked down at her. "Will you dance?" The question surprised her. "With you?" A faint shadow of dry amusement crossed his face. "I had not intended to offer you to another gentleman." Heat touched Eleanor's cheeks, not from flirtation, the absurd intimacy of remembering suddenly that this man was her husband. In name, in law, in every gaze watching them. "I thought you disliked performance," she said. "I dislike unnecessary performance. And this is necessary?" Yes, she understood. If they did not dance, the room would say they could not bear one another. If they danced stiffly, the room would say the marriage was a punishment. If they danced well, the room would have to choke on its disappointment. Eleanor placed her hand in his. "Then we must be convincing." Alistair led her onto the floor. The space opened before them. The waltz began slowly. At first, Eleanor was aware of everything. His hand positioned respectfully at her back, her fingers resting against his shoulder, the measured distance between them, the watching eyes. But as they moved, something unexpected happened. Alistair did not crowd her. He did not use the dance to display possession. He gave her room without trapping, led without forcing. Every turn was precise, every movement controlled but never harsh. Eleanor had danced with Julian many times. Julian danced as he spoke, charmingly, easily, always with the faint sense that he expected to be admired for it. Alistair danced as if discipline itself had learned grace. "You are very good at this," Eleanor said quietly. "My mother said dancing a necessary weapon." Despite herself, Eleanor almost smiled. A weapon? In society, nearly everything is. She looked at Army, his gaze held hers. No. The room blurred for a moment as they turned. Then, because hiding would have allowed them to decide what you were, Eleanor's breath caught. "And what am I?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Alistair's hand at her back remained steady, his voice lowered. "That is yours to decide." The words reached her more deeply than they should have. For days, men had decided for her. Julian had decided she could be abandoned, her father's debts had decided she must marry, society had decided she should be pitied. Even Alistair had decided in one shocking moment to offer his name. But now, here, beneath chandeliers and judgment, he gave the choice back to her. Not freedom, but something like the beginning of it. The waltz carried them past the tall mirrors. For one brief second, Eleanor saw their reflection. She expected the image to look wrong. A mismatched pair, a frightened bride, and the ruthless man who had claimed her. Instead, she saw something that made her heart stumble. They looked formidable, Alistair in black, Eleanor in silver. His severity beside her composure, her light against his shadow. Not soft, not easy. The music ended, applause rose, polite, careful. Eleanor stepped back and curtsied. His hand remained at her back as they left the floor, not heavy, not possessive, but present. A quiet wall between her and every whisper. For the next hour, the room altered around her, not affectionately. Society did not turn kind in one evening. But it turned cautious. That was enough. Ladies spoke to her with measured politeness. Gentlemen bowed with greater care. No one called her poor thing. No one said abandoned within earshot. No one dared. Then Eleanor saw her. Across the ballroom, near a tall arrangement of white lilies, stood Lady Isolde Ravenshaw. She was beautiful in a way that seemed designed to accuse other women of trying too hard. Pale gold hair arranged in soft coils. A gown of faint blue silk that made her look delicate enough to break beneath a harsh word, pearls at her ears. A shawl draped over her arms. Though the room was warm, she looked fragile, perfectly fragile. The kind of fragility that gathered protectors the way honey gathered bees. Julian stood not far from her, too near, too uncertain. His gaze moved between Isolde and Eleanor with the helplessness of a man who wanted sympathy from both the woman he had chosen and the woman he had wronged. Isolde, however, looked only at Eleanor, then a small smile. Soft, almost sorrowful, but Eleanor felt something beneath it. Not shame, calculation. Alistair followed Eleanor's gaze. His expression did not change, but the air beside him sharpened. "You need not speak to her tonight," he said. "I suspect she will not allow the choice to remain mine." "You underestimate my ability to inconvenience." Eleanor looked at him. "Is that what she is? An inconvenience? To you, she should be nothing." That answer told Eleanor more than he intended. Before she could ask what he knew, Lady Isolde began to cross the room. Slowly, gracefully, as though the entire ballroom had been arranged for her fragile courage. Conversations softened as she passed. People watched. Of course they watched. The woman who stole the groom was approaching the woman who married his brother. It was theatre, and Isolde knew exactly how to enter a stage. She stopped before Eleanor and dipped into a delicate curtsy. "Lady Wycliffe," her voice was gentle, almost musical. Eleanor inclined her head. Alistair gave no greeting. Isolde glanced at him, and for the first time, her perfect softness faltered, only slightly. "Lady Isolde," his tone was not rude, it was worse, it was empty. Isolde turned back to Eleanor. "I have wished to speak with you. I fear the events of the other day must have caused you distress." Distress. Such a small word for public ruin. Eleanor smiled faint. "Considerate of you to name it so carefully." Isolde's lashes lowered. "I would never wish to deepen a wound." "No!" Eleanor said. "I imagine you prefer to create one, and then admire how quietly it bleeds." The silence was immediate. Even Alistair turned his head toward her. Isolde's lips parted. For one moment the fragile mask trembled. Then she recovered. "How recently I learned to think clearly," Eleanor replied. Isolde's eyes sharpened. There she was. Not the pale sufferer, not the delicate invalid who could not bear another hour without Julian. A woman with knives beneath her lace. But her voice remained soft. "I hope you understand, Lady Wycliffe, that Alistair does not do anything without a reason." The name struck the air. Alistair, not Lord Wycliffe. "Not your husband, Alistair." A claim disguised as familiarity. Eleanor felt the room listening. She also felt Alistair go utterly still. They sighed again, a little sadly, a little cruelly. Then she curtsied and moved away before anyone could accuse her of impropriety. Eleanor watched her return to Julian's side. The ballroom resumed its movement. Music began again. Voices rose, but the sentence remained. "Alistair does not do anything without a reason." Eleanor looked up at her husband. His expression had closed completely. What did she mean? Alistair's gaze remained across the room, fixed on Isolde and Julian. She meant to unsettle you. She succeeded. At that, he looked at her. Something passed through his eyes, perhaps, or anger, not at her. Never quite at her, but at the world that kept placing traps beneath her feet. I will not discuss Lady Isolde in a ballroom, he said. No, Eleanor replied softly. You prefer libraries for avoiding questions, a flicker, almost amusement, almost pain. Then he offered his arm. Then let us leave before this room invents another drama. Eleanor placed her hand on his sleeve. As they walked toward the exit, the guests parted again. But this time, Eleanor noticed something different. They were no longer watching, only to see if she would fall. They were watching because she had not. At the doors, she paused and looked back once. Julian stood beside Isolde, but his eyes were on Eleanor. Isolde stood beside Julian, but her eyes were on Alistair, and Alistair stood beside Eleanor, unreadable as ever, a man of secrets, a man of control. A man who had offered her his name before the world could devour her. Yet Isolde's words followed Eleanor into the night like a whisper through silk. Alistair does not do anything without a reason. Outside the carriage waited beneath the dark sky. Alistair helped her in, his hand steady as before. But this time Eleanor did not feel merely protected. She felt surrounded by unanswered questions. Why had he truly married her? Why had he expected Julian to fail? And why did Lady Isolde speak his name as though she knew something Eleanor did not? The carriage door closed. The ballroom lights faded behind them. Inside the darkness, Eleanor sat opposite her husband and understood that society had changed its opinion of her. Tonight she was no longer simply the abandoned bride. She had become Viscountess Wycliffe, protected, watched, untouchable, but not yet safe. Whitmore Hall looked beautiful from the road. That was the cruelty of old houses. They knew how to appear whole long after the family inside had begun to break. The long drive curved between wet lawns and sleeping rose gardens, leading toward a pale stone manor with ivy climbing its south wall and tall windows reflecting a silver morning sky from a distance. The house seemed untouched by scandal, proud chimneys, elegant steps, a fanlight above the front door. The kind of house that told visitors a family had lived there for generations and intended to remain for several more. But Lady Eleanor Wycliffe knew better now. She had learned that ruin rarely announced itself from the gates. It hid behind polished brass knockers, behind well-brushed servants' coats, behind flowers cut fresh each morning so guests would not smell the damp in the walls, behind a father's smile, behind a mother's silence. She sat in the Wycliffe carriage as it rolled toward the house of her childhood, her gloved hands folded over a small reticule in her lap. Across from her sat Alistair. He had come with her not because she had asked, because he had informed her at breakfast that she would not make her first visit to Whitmore Hall alone. You believe society's gossip can follow me into my father's drawing room? She had asked. No, Alistair had replied, I believe creditors can. That had ended the conversation. Now he sat opposite her in a dark morning coat, one gloved hand resting over the silver head of his cane. His eyes on the passing trees. He had said very little since they left Wycliffe House. That was becoming familiar. Alistair did not spend words where silence would serve. But silence beside him no longer felt empty to Eleanor. It felt guarded. Like a door closed not because there was nothing behind it, but because too much waited there. Since Lady Hartwell's ball, Isolde's words had followed her. Alistair does not do anything without a reason at night. Eleanor had repeated the sentence until it lost none of its sting. Why had he truly come to St. Bartholomew's prepared to act? Why had his carriage been ready? Why had he known her father's debts would move before sunset? And why did every practical kindness he gave feel less like duty and more like something he refused to name? The carriage stopped before Whitmore Hall. A footman opened the door. Alistair descended first, then offered his hand. Eleanor looked at it for one breath before placing her fingers in his. Again that careful steadiness, never forcing, never lingering, never giving society anything improper to condemn, yet never letting her step down alone. Her father waited at the entrance. Sir Edmund Whitmore looked older than he had 1 week before. The wedding scandal had hollowed him. His hair, once merely touched with grey, seemed now overtaken by it. His coatsy smile trembled before it became fixed. Eleanor, he said. Then, catching himself, he bowed. Lady Wycliffe. The title hurt him. Eleanor saw it, not because he resented it, because it reminded him of how she had earned it. She kissed his cheek. Papa! His eyes filled at once, and he stepped forward. Sir Edmund. My lord. Her father bowed again, lower than was comfortable between family. You honor us. Alistair's face remained controlled. I am here as your daughter's husband. The words were plain, but they steadied the air. Her daughter's husband. Not the man who had rescued them. Not the creditor behind the curtain. Not the feared Viscount who held half the county's respect in one hand and fear in the other. Her husband. Eleanor felt the title settle differently that morning. Inside, Whitmore Hall carried the smell of her childhood, lavender polish. Old paper. Rain in the stone, but beneath it lay something else, a faint neglect. Flowers in the entrance, yes, but arranged to hide the chipped vase. A rug turned carefully so the worn part faced the wall. Curtains faded at the edges drawn to catch the best light. Eleanor noticed all of it now. Before, she had seen home. Now she saw defense. Her mother embraced her in the drawing room, crying softly against her shoulder. "My dearest girl, my brave," Eleanor whispered. "Do not make me brave before tea." Lady Marianne gave a watery laugh and wiped her eyes. Clara flew across the room and held Eleanor as if she had been returned from war. "You look beautiful," Clara whispered. "Everyone says so. They say you were magnificent at Lady Hartwell's ball." "Everyone says many things," Eleanor replied gently, "but this is true." Eleanor touched her sister's cheek. Clara was still too pale, too watchful. The scandal had reached her. Too, a woman's disgrace was rarely content with one victim. It looked for sisters or for mothers, for every female name attached to hers. Alistair stood near the doorway, allowing the family reunion without intrusion. Yet Eleanor saw the servants glance toward him with immediate tension. They knew. Everyone knew men like Viscount Wycliffe did not enter a house without purpose. Tea was served. Conversation attempted to be ordinary. It failed. Lady Marianne spoke of weather. Clara spoke too quickly of a new piece of music. Sir Edmund stirred his tea without drinking it. Alistair answered politely when addressed and otherwise remained silent. But Eleanor felt the truth pressing beneath every sentence. After tea, she rose. "Papa, may I speak with you in your study?" Sir Edmund went still, only for a moment, but Alistair saw it, so did Eleanor. "Of course," her father said. Alistair stood as well. "This is a family matter." His gaze did not move from hers. "You are my family now." The sentence was not tenderly spoken. That made it worse, or better. Eleanor could not decide. Sir Edmund's face crumpled slightly before he controlled it. Lady Marianne looked down at her lap. Clara stared at Alistair as though she had just discovered that dragons could shield a house as easily as burn one. Eleanor gave a small nod. The study was colder than she remembered. The fire had been lit too recently, likely for their arrival. The room smelled of ash, leather, and old worry. Ledgers lay stacked on the desk. Some were closed, some had been turned face down too quickly. Eleanor entered first. Her father followed. Alistair closed the door behind them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Eleanor walked to the desk and placed her hand on the nearest ledger. "How bad is it?" Sir Edmund's face tightened. How bad?" Her voice did not rise. That was why he flinched. Sir Edmund moved to the window. Outside, the rose garden slept beneath a pale mist. The bushes had been pruned carefully, their thorns hidden by distance. He said it was manageable. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. At first, those were dangerous words in a household that had been drowning for years, a mortgage against the Westfields. Then a loan to repair the tenant cottage after the flood. Then another to settle an old obligation. Then interest. He laughed once without humor. "Interest is a gentleman's polite word for a chain." Alistair said nothing. Eleanor looked at him. His face was unreadable, but his silence had changed. He knew the path not as a helpless observer, as a man who had already walked it. Her father continued. "By the time Lord Julian's offer came, I believed." He stopped. Shame filled the room. "I believed the settlement would save us." Eleanor's hand tightened on the ledger. "So my marriage was not merely desirable." Sir Edmund turned. "It was necessary." His eyes reddened. "I did not wish you sold." The word struck them all. Sold. No one in polite society said such things. They wrapped them in better language: alliance, settlement, advantage, security. But daughters knew, wives knew, mothers knew. Sometimes marriage was a ribbon tied around a financial wound. "Who holds the debts?" Her father looked away. "Several parties." "Eleanor, please. Names, Papa." Sir Edmund moved slowly to the desk. With shaking hands, he opened a drawer and withdrew a bundle of letters tied in blue ribbon. Eleanor recognized the ribbon. It had once tied Clara's birthday bonnet. Now it held ruin. He placed the letters on the desk. The first creditor she recognized, Mr. Vale, a London moneylender with a reputation hidden behind polished manners. The second was Lord Penrith, who smiled too often at balls and never lent without taking more than coin. The third was a solicitor's notice threatening legal action. The fourth carried the name Blackmore and Sons. The fifth, Eleanor paused. The fifth letter was settled. She opened it, then another. And another, transferred, paid in full, purchased. She looked up slowly. "Some of these debts have been cleared." Sir Edmund's expression changed. Not relief, fear. "Yes. By whom?" Her father did not answer. Eleanor turned to Alistair. He was standing near the fireplace, still, severe, unsurprised. The room seemed to narrow around him. "You," she said. It was not a... Alistair met her gaze. The word entered the room like a door locking. Eleanor stared at him. "You bought my father's debts? Some of them." "When?" "A few months ago. A few months before the wedding, before Julian's letter, before St. Bartholomew's. Before he had any public obligation to her at all." Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her. "You were involved before Julian abandoned me." "Yes." Alistair looked at Sir Edmund. "Leave us." Her father stiffened. "This is my study. And your daughter is asking questions you will not answer honestly while you are ashamed." The words were harsh, but not cruel. Sir Edmund looked at Eleanor. She nodded once with visible pain. He left the room. The door closed. Eleanor and Alistair stood alone amid ledgers, letters, and the scent of old disgrace. She lifted the papers in her hand. Did you buy them to control us? No. To make certain that when Julian failed, I would have no choice but to accept you. His jaw tightened. Then explain it. At last, emotion moved across his face. Not much. Alistair's control was too practiced for that. But something in his eyes hardened as if he were holding back not anger but old fury. Your father was drowning, he said. Julian knew enough to be useful and not enough to be responsible. Your family was being treated as a convenient alliance by men who intended to profit whether the marriage happened or failed. Eleanor's throat tightened. And you decided to involve yourself. Yes, without telling me. You were not mine to tell. The sentence hit her strangely. Not mine. There was restraint in it. And something more dangerous than restraint. You could have told Julian. I did. Alistair's mouth became a grim line. He called me suspicious. He said I disliked happiness because I could not produce it myself. Eleanor went still. It was such a Julian thing to say. Charming enough to sound harmless, cruel enough to leave a mark, Alistair continued. He believed the settlement would solve everything. He believed affection required no discipline. He believed good intentions were the same as honor. He believed Isolde needed him, Eleanor said quietly. Alistair's eyes darkened. Julian has always been at his weakest when someone asks him to feel noble. The truth of it settled between them. Eleanor looked again at the letters. How much do you hold? Enough to prevent immediate ruin. And the rest? If your father stops hiding from numbers. Despite herself, a small breath left Eleanor, almost a laugh, almost a sob. You speak of our ruin as though it were a misfiled account. No, I speak of it as something that can be solved. And what price do you expect for solving it? The words came quickly, too quickly. She regretted them as soon as they struck. But Alistair did not flinch. Perhaps men like him were used to being suspected. Perhaps that was why he wore coldness so well. He stepped closer to the desk. Do you believe I would purchase your family's debts to make you grateful? I do not know what to believe. His answer disarmed her. She had expected defense, offense, pride, instead fairness. It made her angrier because it made him harder to hate. You saved me at the altar, she said. You command your servants not to gossip. You bring me into society before they can bury me. You buy my father's debts months before any of it, and still you tell me nothing. What am I meant to think? Think poorly of me if it keeps you safe. Eleanor stared. What does that mean? It means I have no interest in being admired for doing what should have been done. You think this is noble? No, then what is it? His control faltered, but she saw it, pain, fierce and buried. No, he said slowly. I bought them because I could not bear to watch them use your loyalty as a chain. The room stilled outside the window. The rose branches moved softly in the wind. Eleanor could not speak. Your loyalty, not your beauty, not your fortune, not your usefulness. Your loyalty, he had seen that in her. The part of her that would have married Julian not for foolish dreams, but because her family needed saving. The part of her that would have smiled through discomfort if it meant Clara was protected. The part of her that had stood in church while the world laughed and still thought first of those behind her. Alistair looked away, as if he had said too much. I have watched too many men praise a woman's devotion while quietly building cages from it. Eleanor's voice softened. And you are not such a man? No, he looked back at her. I build ledgers. The absurdity of the answer broke something in her. A quiet laugh escaped, unsteady, almost painful. Alistair blinked, as though laughter was not a sound his study conversations usually produced. Eleanor pressed her fingers to her lips and looked away. I beg your pardon. Do not. The softness of his voice made her laughter vanish. For a moment they stood on opposite sides of the desk, surrounded by evidence that he had protected her before she had known she needed protecting. Her understanding of him shifted again. He was ruthless. Yes. But perhaps his ruthlessness had never been aimed at the helpless. Perhaps it was aimed at those who mistook helplessness for opportunity. Eleanor looked down at the letters. What happens now? Now your father signs nothing without my solicitor reviewing it. Papa will hate that. Your father has earned supervision. Eleanor could not argue. And Clara? She will not suffer for this. You can promise that? Alistair held her gaze. Yes. The certainty in his voice entered her like warmth and warning. She wanted to trust it. That frightened her. Before she could answer, a knock sounded at the door. Sir Edmund entered with a servant behind him. The servant carried a small silver tray. My lady, the maid said, just arrived for you. Eleanor frowned. For me? Yes, my lady, sent by hand. The envelope rested on the tray. No crest, no flourish, but Eleanor knew the handwriting before she touched it. Julian, the room changed. Alistair saw the recognition on her face. He said nothing. That silence was worse than any question. Eleanor took the letter. Her fingers felt cold around it. Sir Edmund looked between them, confused and uneasy. Alistair's expression had become unreadable again. The ruthless Viscount had returned. Eleanor broke the seal. The first line struck her like a voice from a life she had buried too recently. Eleanor. No, she stopped, then corrected herself silently. Lady Wycliffe, her eyes moved down the page. I have no right to ask anything of you, and yet I must. There are matters I did not understand when I left the church. Isolde was not as she seemed. I fear I have been used, though I know that does not excuse the pain I caused you. Eleanor's grip tightened. The letter continued. If there remains any kindness in you for the man you once agreed to marry, grant me one private conversation. I must explain. I must make you understand that I never meant to destroy you. Never meant. There it was again, the weak shelter of intention. At the bottom, his signature curved elegantly. Julian. For several seconds, Eleanor heard nothing. Not the wind, not the fire, not her father's breathing. She saw only the church, the sealed letter, the vicar's pity, the rose falling at her feet. Then she folded Julian's letter carefully. Will you answer her? His voice, he asked, was calm. Too calm. Eleanor looked at him. She could not read him. That wounded her more than it should have. No, she said. Alistair's expression did not change, but something in the room eased. Perhaps in him. Perhaps in her. She placed Julian's letter on the desk beside the debt notices. How fitting, she thought. One letter had ruined her. Another now asked to be forgiven for it. Both belonged among cleared his throat. Eleanor, perhaps Lord Julian is. No. Papa. Her father closed his mouth. Eleanor's voice remained quiet, but there was steel beneath it now. Lord Julian does not receive a private audience because guilt has become uncomfortable. Alistair looked at her then, fully. And this time, there was no mistaking the flicker in his eyes. Approval, not loud, not warm, but real. Eleanor gathered the settled debt letters and tied them again with the blue ribbon, the ribbon from Clara's bonnet, the ribbon that had held ruin. Now it held evidence. Evidence that Alistair's protection had begun long before duty required it. That knowledge frightened her. Because duty she understood, strategy she could resist. But quiet protection, given in secret and without demand for gratitude, was far more dangerous to a guarded heart. Later, as they prepared to leave Whitmore Hall, Clara walked Eleanor to the entrance. Are you happy? Clara whispered. The question was so young, so impossible. Eleanor looked toward the carriage where Alistair stood speaking with Sir Edmund in low, controlled tones. Was she not yet? Happiness was too simple a word for a life remade by scandal. But she was not broken, she was not alone. And the man waiting to take her home was no longer merely the stranger who had married her in front of a hungry church. He was the man who had seen chains around her before anyone else admitted they existed. I am safe, Eleanor said. Clara searched her face. Is that enough? Eleanor did not answer at once. Across the drive, Alistair turned as if he had sensed her looking. Their eyes met for one moment. Neither moved, then he inclined his head slightly. Not command, not possession, assurance. Eleanor looked back at Clara. For now, she said softly. It is more than I had. As the Wycliffe carriage carried her away from Whitmore Hall, Eleanor watched the rose gardens disappear behind mist and stone. Beneath the roses, debts had been hidden. Beneath the debts, secrets. And beneath Alistair Wycliffe's coldness, something she was beginning to fear more than cruelty, care. Behind her in her reticule, Julian's letter remained unanswered. Ahead of her, Lord Blackwood's country gathering waited. And Eleanor did not yet know that Lady Isolde Ravenshaw had already been invited. The woman who stole the groom was preparing to enter the same house as the bride who had survived her. This time, Eleanor would not be standing at an altar. This time she would be watching. Lord Blackwood's estate stood on a hill above the river. Surrounded by autumn woods and pale morning mist, it was the sort of house society trusted with its secrets, wide lawns, tall windows, a stone terrace overlooking the gardens, a library deep enough for private conversations, corridors long enough for scandal to travel unseen before arriving fully dressed at dinner. Blackwood House had hosted ministers, widows, gamblers, heiresses, and men who smiled with debts in their pockets. It had survived elopements, duels, broken engagements, and one mysterious disappearance of a diamond necklace that no one mentioned unless the wine was excellent. Now it prepared to receive Lady Eleanor Whitcliffe, the bride who had been abandoned, the wife who had become untouchable, and the woman whose place at the altar had been stolen by the pale beauty waiting inside. Eleanor saw the house through the carriage window as the wheels curved up the final stretch of drive. It was beautiful. That made it worse. Danger often preferred beautiful rooms. Beside her, Alistair sat in his usual controlled silence, one gloved hand resting over the head of his cane. He had spoken little since they departed Wycliffe House, except to inform her which guests were expected. Lord Benedict Ashbourne, Lady Rosamond Hartwood, Lady Arabella Montclair, several county families, a handful of London acquaintances, Lord Julian Wycliffe, and Lady Isolde Ravenshaw. Alistair said Isolde's name without expression. Eleanor had not been able to do the same in her own mind. Lady Isolde Ravenshaw, the woman Julian had run to on the morning of his wedding, the woman who had sent Eleanor's life into ruin with one carefully timed emergency. The woman who had smiled at Lady Hartwell's ball and said, "Alistair does not do anything without a reason." Since then, Eleanor had carried that sentence like a sealed letter in her chest, unopened, poisonous, waiting. The carriage slowed before the entrance. Servants stood lined upon the steps. Lord Blackwood himself waited beneath the portico, smiling with the practiced ease of a man who enjoyed tension so long as it occurred beneath his roof and not at his expense. "Lord Wycliffe," he said, bowing as Alistair descended. "Lady Wycliffe, we are honoured." It was safer than curious, safer than excited, safer than delighted to watch you bleed politely over supper. Alistair turned and offered Eleanor his hand. She placed her gloved fingers in his. The gesture had become familiar now, still formal, still careful, but something in Eleanor had begun to wait for it. That troubled her. A woman in her position ought not wait for small kindnesses. They were dangerous things. Kindness made dependency feel like dignity. Yet Alistair's hand was steady beneath hers as she stepped down. Lord Blackwood's gaze flickered over them both. "Lady Wycliffe," he said warmly, "we are most pleased you accepted. The house has been dull beyond bearing." Eleanor smiled. "How fortunate that my life has provided entertainment." "My lord," Lord Blackwood blinked, then laughed, not loudly, respectfully. Alistair's mouth remained still, but Eleanor felt his gaze touch her for the briefest second. Approval, again that dangerous warmth side. The entrance hall was grand enough to impress without shouting. Marble floors, a sweeping staircase, tall mirrors, oil portraits, bowls of late roses arranged with expensive care. The scent struck Eleanor first. Roses. She nearly stopped. White roses had climbed the church pillars on the day Julian left her. White roses had fallen at her feet when the vicar read his letter. White roses now filled Blackwood House, as though the world had decided her humiliation should have a fragrance. Alistair noticed. Of course he did. His voice lowered beside her. Eleanor looked ahead. "Flowers have witnessed much, then let them witness you standing." The words entered her quietly. Not comfort, command, perhaps, or belief. She could not tell the difference with him. A footman led them to the drawing-room where guests had gathered before luncheon. Conversation paused as they entered. Not completely. Society had grown more skilled since Lady Hartwell's ball, but enough. Eleanor saw the room take them in. Alistair in black, severe and unreadable. Eleanor in a travelling gown of dark green silk, modest, elegant and controlled. Together, they made a picture no one knew how to interpret. Was it a marriage of duty, a silent war, a punishment, a triumph? The uncertainty annoyed them. Therefore Eleanor cherished it. Lady Rosamond Hartwell came forward first, kindness lighting her face. "Lady Wycliffe, you look very well after your journey." "You are kind to say so." Eleanor nearly smiled. Lord Benedict Ashbourne bowed over her hand. "Mr. Nathaniel Blackwood greeted Alistair with the wary respect men gave to a gentleman who could ruin their credit before breakfast. Then the room shifted softly. Like silk sliding from a blade, Eleanor turned. Lady Isolde Ravenshaw sat near the window. She had arranged herself beautifully. There was no other word for it. A pale blue gown, a white shawl drawn about her shoulders. Blonde hair pinned loosely enough to seem effortless, though no strand had dared disobey. Her face was delicate, her mouth soft, her eyes faintly shadowed, as if she had suffered heroically and wished no one to mention it while ensuring everyone noticed. Beside her stood Julian. He looked tired. That gave Eleanor no satisfaction, or rather it gave her less satisfaction than she had expected. Regret had touched him. It showed in the hollows beneath his eyed mind and the way he watched Eleanor, before remembering he had lost the right to do so openly. Isolde rose slowly, too slowly, as though the effort cost her. "Lady Wycliffe," she said. Every conversation nearby became less convincing. Eleanor inclined her head. Lady Isolde. Alistair bowed, barely. "Lady Isolde." If a door could speak while closing, it would have used that tone. Isolde's lashes flickered. Then she smiled as if wounded grace were her native language. "I had not known whether you would come." Eleanor held her gaze. "That appears to be a common uncertainty with Wycliffe family gatherings." Julian flinched. Isolde's smile tightened. A small victory. Not enough to end a war, but enough to declare one. Luncheon was served with the exquisite discomfort only aristocratic households could perfect. Guests spoke of weather, music, parliament and horses and the declining quality of imported lace. No one spoke of St. Bartholomew's. No one spoke of Julian's letter. No one spoke of Isolde's miraculous recovery from a grave condition that had required another woman's groom. Precise hour of his wedding, but silence when arranged carefully could accuse as clearly as speech. Eleanor sat beside Alistair at the long table. Julian sat across from her. Isolde sat beside him. Every placement had been chosen by Lord Blackwood with the cruelty of a man who called himself. Alistair ate little. Eleanor noticed because she had begun noticing things about him without permission from herself. He spoke when necessary, listened when useful, refused to fill silence simply because others feared it. At one point, Lady Arabella Montclair asked him whether he enjoyed country gatherings. "No," he said. The table paused. Then Eleanor lifted her glass. How fortunate, my lord, that you married a woman capable of suffering society on behalf of the household. Several guests laughed, the tension eased. Alistair looked at her. There it was again, that fleeting warmth so small another woman might have missed it. Eleanor did not. That troubled her more than Isolde's sharpest smile. After luncheon the guests dispersed, some to cards, some to rest, some to walk the grounds beneath a pale afternoon sky. Eleanor chose the garden. She needed air. She also needed space away from the room where Isolde's fragility occupied more chairs than her body did. The garden path curved beneath yew hedges and late roses. Fallen leaves scattered gold and brown across the gravel. The air smelled of damp earth, fading flowers, and cold approaching rain. Eleanor walked alone for several minutes. At least she believed she was alone. Then Julian stepped from the side path. Eleanor. She stopped. Her body did not tremble this time. That itself felt like progress. Lord Julian. The correction struck him. She saw it. I deserve that. You deserve many things. I have chosen restraint. He looked down. I know you do not wish to speak with me. Then why are you here? Because I cannot bear what you must think of me. Eleanor almost laughed. Not because it was amusing, because even now his suffering remained centered in himself. What I think of you should trouble you less than what you did. Julian's face tightened. I was deceived. There it was, the first offering. Not apology. Defense, were you? His eyes lifted. Isolde sent word that she was dangerously unwell. Her maid said she had taken to her bed. That she spoke of ending her life if I married another. Eleanor's expression changed at the seriousness of the claim, but she kept her voice steady. That was a grave thing to hear. It was, I thought. You thought her need mattered more than your vow. He flinched. I thought I could delay the ceremony, explain later. I did not know the letter would be read aloud. Eleanor stared at him. The garden seemed suddenly colder. Then your regret is not that you abandoned me. It is that society heard you do it. No, he stepped closer. No. Eleanor, that is not what I meant. Do not use my name as though it survived the church unchanged. He stopped. For the first time, true shame crossed his face. Good, let him feel at least one honest thing. I was weak. I know that now. Not when I stood beneath the roses. His eyes closed. Please. Not when my sister wept in the front pew. Eleanor. Not when my father's debts became a banquet for half the county. Julian looked at her sharply. You know about the debts? A bitter smile touched her mouth. I have learned many things since becoming your brother's wife. Something passed over Julian's face. Pain. Jealousy. Perhaps both. Alistair should never involved you in that. Alistair has involved me in the truth. You involved me in humiliation. He had no answer. For a moment the only sound was the wind moving through the hedges. Then Julian said, it need not be permanent. Eleanor went still. What? Your marriage. Everyone knows how sudden it was. Alistair is practical. He would not bind you forever if what? If your feelings were unchanged. The insult arrived slowly. Not because the words were loud, because they revealed so much. He believed there was a part of her waiting, a part preserved for him beneath the title Lady Wycliffe, a woman who could be retrieved once he had finished regretting himself. Eleanor looked at him with a calm that cost her dearly. You left me to be devoured by the very society you promised to protect me from. Julian's eyes reddened. I know. You know that you are uncomfortable. That is not the same as knowing what you did. No, she said softly. You liked being loved by me. The words silenced him. Eleanor felt them settle in her own chest with painful clarity. Perhaps that had always been the truth. Julian had liked her loyalty, her patience, her ability to forgive before offense fully formed. He had liked the ease of being admired by a woman trained not to ask for too much, but love required courage. And Julian had mistaken charm for character. He stepped closer again, desperation breaking through polish. I can make it right. You cannot make abandonment right by asking the abandoned woman to rearrange her life around your guilt. His face changed. Is that what he has taught you to say? Eleanor's voice cooled. Be careful. Julian stared at her. The warning seemed to surprise him. Perhaps because he remembered a gentler woman. A woman who softened edges for other people's comfort. That woman had not died at the altar, but she had learned who deserved gentleness. Before Julian could answer, Eleanor became aware of someone standing at the far end of the path. Alistair, he was beneath a bare-branched tree, dark coat still against the muted garden, his face unreadable. How long had he been there? Enough. Eleanor knew it at once. Julian followed her gaze and stiffened. Alistair approached slowly, not hurried, not dramatic. That made him more dangerous. Julian. The two brothers faced one another in the narrow garden path. For a moment, Eleanor saw their resemblance. Not in temperament, the same height almost, the same strong family line, but Julian's beauty had always invited forgiveness. Alistair's face warned against foolishness. I was speaking with Lady Wycliffe, Julian said. Alistair replied. You were cornering my wife. The word wife entered the path like a drawn blade. Eleanor's heart beat once hard. Julian flushed. She can answer for herself. She already did. Repeatedly, you failed to listen. The silence between them sharpened. Eleanor stepped between the moment before it could become something more. Lord Julian was just leaving. The loss in his face was real. Too late, but real, he bowed. Lady Wycliffe. Then he walked away down the path, shoulders stiff, pride wounded, regret trailing behind him like a torn cloak. Eleanor did not move until he disappeared. Then she became aware of Alistair beside her. Too still, too silent, you heard? Yes. How much? Enough, the words settled badly. She waited for him to ask. Did you believe him? Do you still care for him? Do you regret the marriage? But Alistair asked none of those things. He only looked in the direction Julian had gone, jaw set. That conversation should not have happened alone. Eleanor's pride helpless? No. His eyes returned to hers. You are not. The answer stopped her again. He refused the insult she had prepared herself to fight. Then why did she still feel wounded? Because he looked controlled. Because he had heard Julian imply the marriage need not be permanent. Because he said nothing. Because perhaps he agreed 1 year. The bargain returned like a cold hand at her back. After 1 year, if she wished, he would arrange a separate life. Perhaps that was all this was to him. Protection, repair, a temporary public arrangement, and Eleanor, foolishly, had begun to feel the shape of something warmer beneath it. She turned away. Yes, I did not invite him. No. Then why do you look as though I have disappointed you? Alistair's face changed only slightly. You have not. The words were immediate. Too immediate. For the first time he looked almost tired. Julian wants what he lost. He does not yet understand that wanting is not the same as deserving. The words should have comforted her. But something in his voice hurt. You speak as though you are certain he still wants me. Alistair's gaze hardened. I saw his face when you entered Lady Hartwell's ballroom. Eleanor stared. And does that matter to you? A pause. There at last. A crack in the armor. It matters if it endangers you. She smiled faintly. Sadly. What else should there be? The question was quiet, and it broke something open between them. Not fully. Not enough. But enough for Eleanor to see the edge of what neither of them dared touch. What else should there be? She could have answered. She could have said warmth, trust, truth, choice, love. But the word love belonged to stories told to younger women before they discovered marriage. Settlements and sealed letters, so she said nothing. And Alistair perhaps heard everything in it. They walked back toward the house together, but not far apart. From an upstairs window unsigned by them, Lady Isolde Ravenshaw watched. Her face held none of the fragile sorrow she wore in public. Her eyes were clear, cold. Assessing, she had seen Julian leave the garden wounded. She had seen Alistair and Eleanor return in silence, and she understood what weak people always feared most, not hatred. Hatred could be used. Not scandal. Scandal could be shaped. Closeness between two people who did not yet trust it was a delicate thing. One did not need to crush it, only make it doubt itself. That evening, dinner was followed by music in the long drawing-room. Lady Arabella played first, then Rosamond sang a soft Italian air. Isolde declined when asked, pressing a delicate hand to her throat. I fear I am not strong enough tonight. Julian leaned toward her at once. Do not exert yourself. Eleanor watched from across the room. Not with jealousy, with understanding. Isolde's fragility was not weakness, it was command. Every lowered eyelash gave orders. Every sigh rearranged a room. Every tremble made someone else guilty. Alistair stood near the mantel, speaking with Lord Ashbourne. His face was composed, but Eleanor had begun to read the small signs, the slight tightening around his mouth, the way his attention moved, briefly, to Isolde whenever Julian hovered. He knew she was dangerous. He had known for some time. Why had he not told her everything? Later, as guests drifted toward their rooms, Eleanor found herself in a candlelit corridor outside the west staircase. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The house had quieted into that strange country estate stillness where every footstep seemed guilty. She turned a corner and stopped. Alistair stood there, alone, the candlelight carved shadows beneath his cheekbones. For a moment neither spoke. Then he said, I was coming to find you. Why? To ensure you were not lost. The corridor stretched behind him, quiet and gold-lit. Eleanor folded her hands. Not so easily, you are not. Another silence, not empty, full. Too full. Eleanor looked down the corridor toward the distant sound of laughter fading below. Julian believes our marriage can be undone. Alistair's face closed. Julian believes many convenient things. And you, he did not answer at once. The pause hurt more than refusal. 1 year, she said, was the bargain. Yes. If you still mean it, then perhaps he is not entirely wrong. Alistair stepped closer. Only one step, enough to make the candle between them flicker. I do not consider my marriage a convenience to be handed back because Julian discovered regret. Her breath caught. The words were not a confession, but they sounded dangerously close to one. Then what do you consider it? His eyes held hers. For one moment the ruthless Viscount was gone. Not entirely, but enough. Behind the discipline stood a man at war with himself. A man who had spent years mastering silence because speech might reveal too much. Eleanor, he said. Her name in his voice changed the air. Not Lady Wycliffe, not my wife, Eleanor. She waited. He seemed almost to continue, almost to tell her something. Then footsteps sounded at the far end of the corridor. A maid carrying linen appeared, saw them curtsied quickly and vanished down another passage. The moment broke. His face became controlled again. "You should rest," he said. Eleanor felt foolish for the sting in her chest. "Yes," she replied, "of course." She moved to pass him, then stopped. "Alistair," he turned. "If there is something I should know about Isolde, tell me before she uses it." His gaze darkened. "There are many things you should know about Lady Isolde." "Then why not say them?" "Because accusation without proof gives a skilled liar a stage." The answer chilled her. "So you are waiting?" Eleanor nodded, slowly. "And am I to watch as well?" His voice lowered. "Yes, then." After a pause, "But do not watch her alone." The warning followed Eleanor to her room. Behind another door, not far away, Isolde sat before her mirror while her maid unpinned her pale hair. The fragile expression was gone. In the candlelight, her face looked sharper. Older, not less beautiful, more dangerous. Julian's apology had failed. Alistair's attention had not drifted from his wife, and Eleanor, instead of crumbling beneath embarrassment, had begun to stand with a calm that irritated Isolde more than open defiance ever could. Her maid, Anna, glanced at her reflection. "My lady." Isolde removed one pearl earring slowly, delicately. "They are closer than they should be." Anna said nothing. Set the pearl on the table. "Julian is becoming useless. Guilt has made him sentimental, and sentiment makes men careless." "Shall I speak to Lord Julian?" "My lady?" "No." Isolde smiled then, a soft, terrible smile. "Lord Julian already doubts himself. That is easy. I require Lady Wycliffe to doubt him." "Lord Julian?" Isolde looked toward the door, as if she could see through the walls to the room where Eleanor slept beneath the protection of a name Isolde had not expected her to keep. "I require her to doubt Alistair." Isolde's smile deepened. "If Lady Wycliffe learns to love him beyond repair, everything is lost." She lifted the second earring from her ear. "Then we shall have to make Lady Wycliffe doubt him before she loves him beyond repair." Outside, the rain thickened against Blackwood House. In one room, Eleanor lay awake, remembering how Alistair had said her name. In another, Alistair stood by his window, staring into the dark as though silence could keep desire disciplined, and across the corridor, Isolde Ravenshaw began arranging the next scandal, not with tears this time, with patience, because the woman who stole the groom had realized something dangerous. The bride she had meant to ruin was no longer alone, and the ruthless Viscount who married her might not have done it for duty at all. The grand dinner at Blackwood House was arranged like a painting. Silver candelabra burned along the table. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight and broke it into trembling stars. Fresh roses stood in tall vases between courses, pale and fragrant, their beauty almost too perfect to be trusted. Every guest had dressed for elegance. Every smile had dressed for war. It was the final evening of Lord Blackwood's country gathering, and everyone knew it. The house had ripened with tension all week. Julian avoided Eleanor but watched her when he believed no one noticed. Isolde remained delicate, pale, and wounded in all the correct places. Alistair spoke little, but his silence had become sharper, and Eleanor had learned to read the room as one might read a legal document, slowly, carefully, searching for what had been hidden between the lines. At dinner she sat beside Alistair, not close enough to invite comment, not distant enough to invite pity. Their marriage had become the most dangerous kind of mystery. A public arrangement with private shadows, a scandal repaired too well. A bargain beginning to look like something neither husband nor wife dared name. Across the table, Lady Isolde Ravenshaw looked fragile in a gown of soft rose silk. Her hair was pinned loosely at the nape of her neck. A single pearl hung at her throat. Her eyes seemed tired, her smile gentle, her voice quiet enough to make others lean closer. It was a performance so perfect that Eleanor might have admired it had she not been meant to suffer from it. Beside Isolde, Julian appeared restless. He touched his wineglass often without drinking much. His gaze moved from Isolde to Eleanor, then from Eleanor to Alistair, as though every person at the table represented a mistake he had not known how to prevent. Lord Blackwood watched everything with the private delight of a host whose gathering had become unforgettable. After dinner, the guests moved to the long drawing-room for a music-ale. The room glowed beneath chandeliers. Heavy velvet curtains framed the windows. A fire burned low at one end of the room. The pianoforte stood near the center, polished and waiting. Ladies settled upon settees. Gentlemen stood in small groups, speaking softly. Servants moved through the room with trays of wine, tea, and sweetmeats. Eleanor stood near the fireplace, her gloved hands folded before her. She wore deep blue silk that evening, with silver threading along the sleeves. Her hair had been arranged simply, not in bridal softness, but with the quiet authority of a married woman who no longer needed society's permission. To stand upright, Alistair came to her side. She looked at him. That is a dangerous accusation in a house where Lady Isolde has made paleness an art. For one brief moment his mouth almost curved, almost. Then his eyes moved across the room to Isolde. She is watching. She always is. So are you. Eleanor lowered her voice. You told me to. I told you not to do it alone. And am I alone? His gaze returned to hers. The room seemed to dim around them. No. A simple word. A dangerous one. Not romantic in the way poets demanded, but steady. Certain. The kind of word a woman could lean against without meaning to. Before Eleanor could answer, Lord Blackwood clapped his hands lightly. My friends, Lady Rosamond has agreed to begin our little concert. If we are fortunate, others may be persuaded to follow. The guests turned. Music began. Rosamond sang first, her voice clear and sweet, filling the room with an Italian melody full of longing. Conversation faded, fans stilled. Even Julian stopped shifting where he stood near the windows. Eleanor listened, but part of her attention remained on Isolde. The woman had not moved. She sat with her hands folded, her eyes lowered, a picture of fragile endurance. Then a footman entered quietly and crossed toward Alistair. He held a small folded note upon a silver tray. Eleanor noticed because Alistair noticed first. His expression did not change, but his body became still. The footman bowed. My lord. Eleanor took the note. The paper was plain, no seal, no signature visible. He opened it with controlled fingers. His eyes moved once across the word, then again. Is something wrong? Eleanor asked. Alistair folded the note. Possibly that word chilled her more than alarm would have done. What is it? His voice remained low. A matter concerning Julian's debts. Eleanor's gaze flickered across the room. Julian stood beside the window, unaware. Julian has debt. Julian has habits. Alistair, he looked at her. The candlelight caught the hard line of his jaw. I will return shortly. No. The word escaped before dignity could dress it. He paused. Eleanor lowered her voice further. You warned me not to watch Isolde alone. I am warning you now. Do not follow unsigned notes alone. Something moved in his eyes. Not irritation. Recognition. I will take Graves, he said. Your butler is not here. A footman, then. That is not the same as caution. His gaze held hers for a moment longer. Then Lord Ashbourne approached from behind them. Wycliffe, is all well? Alistair slipped the note into his coat. A matter requiring 5 Eleanor watched him turn. Every instinct in her tightened. She wanted to follow, but that would create spectacle. And spectacle was exactly the kind of stage Isolde loved, so Eleanor remained where she was. The music continued. Alistair left the drawing room through the side door, and across the room Lady Isolde Ravenshaw lowered her eyes to hide a smile. Not a large smile, not a foolish one, a ghost of satisfaction. Eleanor saw it. Her breath stopped. The trap had begun. Minutes passed. 5, 7, 10. Rosamond finished her song to polite applause. Lady Arabella sat at the pianoforte next, beginning a lively piece that sounded wrong in a room where Eleanor could feel danger collecting like storm clouds. She looked toward the side door. Alistair had not returned. Isolde rose slowly from her chair. A maid stood beside her as though summoned by thought. Isolde whispered something, one hand lifting to her brow. Julian stepped toward her. At once, a little faint, Isolde murmured. Of course, faintness. Her favor need air. Julian offered his arm, but Isolde shook her head gently. No, stay, please. I would not disturb the company. She moved toward the opposite door with her maid. Eleanor's spine went cold. The room continued around her, unaware or pretending to be. Then another maid approached Eleanor, a young woman with frightened eyes. My lady, she whispered, curtsying. Forgive me. Lord Wycliffe, he asked. Eleanor turned fully. What of Lord Wycliffe? He is in the west sitting room, my lady. I think you should come. The words were soft, arranged soft. Eleanor looked at the maid's face. Fear, but not only fear, instruction. She had been told what to say. By whom? Eleanor's first instinct was to call Lord Blackwood, or even Julian, if desperation required irony. But if Alistair was in danger, delay could cost him, and if this was a trap, walking openly into it might be the only way to see its shape. Eleanor lifted her chin. Lead me. The maid turned at once. Eleanor followed her from the drawing room, through a dim corridor lined with portraits. The music faded behind them. Each step sounded too loud against the polished floor. At the end of the corridor, the maid paused before a half-open door. Light spilled through the narrow gap. Voices came from within. Isolde's voice, low, trembling, perfect. You should not have come, my lord. Eleanor went still. Then Alistair's voice, unsteady. Not lies the note. Eleanor's heart lurched. She pushed the door open. The west sitting room had been arranged like accusation. A fire burned too hot in the grate. 2 glasses stood on a small table. One was half full. A woman's shawl lay across the arm of a chair, placed not carelessly but deliberately enough to suggest carelessness. The room smelled faintly of roses and strong wine. Alistair stood near the mantel, one hand braced against it. His face was pale. His eyes, usually sharp and controlled, seemed unfocused, not senseless, but clearly affected, drugged perhaps, or given something meant to weaken his composure without taking his mind entirely. Isolde stood several feet away from him, one hand pressed to her chest, eyes bright with tears that had arrived too quickly. Lady Wycliffe, she breathed. The maid behind Eleanor's gasped, then footsteps sounded in the corridor. More guests, of course. The door had been left open for them. Lord Blackwood appeared first, then Julian, then Lady Aralades, whose faces lit with horror and hunger in equal measure. The stage was full. Isolde turned toward Iwan to shaking. Alistair looked toward Eleanor. For one terrible second, her heart broke. Not because she wanted her to. It had been built for her pain. 2 glasses, a shawl, a private sitting room, a pale woman trembling, unsteady, a door left open, a maid sent to fetch the wife at precisely the right moment. Society would need so little. It always needed so little when a woman's happiness could be made into entertainment. Julian stepped forward, his face darkening. Alistair tried to straighten. His hand tightened on the mantel. Eleanor, her name came rough but clear. Not guilty. Relieved. That was what stopped her from falling. Relief. On his face, in his voice, as though even through whatever clouded his senses, the sight of her was not exposure, it was rescue. Eleanor looked closer. The long glass was near Alistair's hand. Not near, placed there. His gloves were still on. The glass had no mark from his fingers. The other glass stood closer to the chair where Isolde had clearly sat. The shawl lay too perfectly. The door was open too conveniently. Isolde's tears trembled, but her breathing was calm. And on the table beside the glasses lay a folded note. Eleanor saw the edge of her. The note that had summoned Alistair. A trap did not succeed because it was clever. It succeeded because pain made people stop looking. Eleanor became still, utterly still. That stillness frightened the room. Isolde spoke first. "I am so sorry, I never wished." "No," Eleanor said. The word cut cleanly through her performance. Isolde blinked. Eleanor walked into the room, slowly. The gathered guests parted without realizing they had done so. She went first to Alistair. He tried to stand straighter. "I am well," he said under his breath. "You are not," she replied softly. Then to the nearest footman gathering in the doorway, she said, "Send for water. And Mr. Graves, if he has arrived with Lord Wycliffe's papers now." The footman ran. Eleanor turned to the room. Her voice did not shake. "Since we are all apparently invited to this scene, let us examine it properly." A silence fell. Lady Arabella's fan lowered. Lord Blackwood's expression sharpened. Julian stared at Eleanor as if he had never seen her before. Isolde's eyes flickered. Only once. "But," Eleanor whispered, "surely this is not the moment." "This is precisely the moment," Eleanor said. She crossed to the table and lifted the folded note. Lord Wycliffe was summoned here by this. A note concerning Lord Julian's debts. How interesting that a matter of financial urgency led him not to a study, not to Lord Blackwood's office, not to my husband's solicitor, but to a private sitting room. Lord Blackwood stepped forward. "I sent no such note. I did not imagine you had." Her eyes moved to Isolde. Isolde's hand trembled beautifully. "I know nothing of any note." "How fortunate, Eleanor." "Then you cannot object to someone reading it aloud." Isolde's mouth tightened. Eleanor handed it to Lord Ashbourne, who had entered quietly at the back of the group. "My lord, would you be so kind?" Lord Ashbourne unfolded the paper. His voice was grim as he read. "Urgent. Information regarding Lord Julian's obligations and Lady Wycliffe's security. Come at once to the west sitting room, alone." A murmur moved through the doorway. Eleanor looked at Julian. His face had gone pale. "I wrote no such thing," Julian said. "I believe you." The words surprised him. They surprised Isolde more. Eleanor continued, "Because whoever wrote it wished Lord Wycliffe here alone, and wished me brought here after." She turned to the maid who had fetched her. The girl was shaking now. "Who instructed you to bring me?" The maid looked at Isolde. "Just for a second." "Enough," Isolde inhaled sharply. "Do not be absurd. The poor girl is frightened. She should be." Eleanor replied, "She has been used." The maid burst into tears. "My lady said only that Lord Wycliffe was unwell and Lady Wycliffe should see. I meant no harm." "My lady?" Eleanor asked. The maid covered her mouth. The room heard. Everyone heard. The fragility remained. But now it cracked at the edge. "I found him here in such a state. I did what any lady would do." "No," Eleanor said. "You did what a skilled actress would do." The room went silent again. Alistair shifted behind her. "Eleanor," he murmured. She did not turn. Not yet. This time she would stand before him. This time she would be the shield. She pointed to the glasses. "There are 2 glasses. The one nearest Lord Wycliffe appears placed for effect. He still wears his gloves. There is no mark upon the glass. The other stands nearer the chair where Lady Isolde sat." Lord Blackwood moved closer, studying the table. Eleanor continued. "The shawl is arranged as if abandoned in distress, but it has not slipped. It was laid there, deliberately." Lady Arabella whispered, "Good heavens!" Isolde's voice sharpened. "This is monstrous. I am being accused because I showed compassion." "No," Eleanor said. "You are being questioned because your compassion always seems to require an audience." A sound moved through the room. Shock, recognition. Julian looked at Isolde slowly. For the first time, not with devotion, with a suspicion. Isolde saw it. Her face became desperate. "Julian, you know me." "I thought I did." That struck harder than any accusation. Isolde turned back to Eleanor. "You cannot prove this." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Then she said softly, "You mistook my silence for weakness, Lady Isolde. That was your first mistake. No one moved, even the fire seemed to lower itself." Eleanor stepped closer. "Your second was believing that because you once stole a groom, you could steal a husband the same way." Isolde flinched. There it was, the wound beneath the lace. Eleanor did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. "The morning of my wedding, you sent for Lord Julian with a tragedy timed too perfectly to be innocent. Tonight, you sent for Lord Wycliffe with a note timed too perfectly to be coincidence. You made yourself fragile when it served you, helpless when it excused you." Isolde's eyes burned now, not with tears, with fury. Eleanor turned to the guests. "Look carefully. This room was arranged to make you stop thinking and start whispering. That is how reputations are killed in houses like this. Not by truth, by furniture, by timing, by a woman crying before anyone asks why." Lord Blackwood's face had gone hard. He looked at the maid. "Who gave you the instruction?" The maid sobbed. "Lady Isolde, my lord." Isolde stepped back. "No." Julian looked as though the last loyalty in him had finally snapped. "Isolde," she turned on him. "You would believe her?" His voice broke. "I believed you once." The sentence landed like judgment. For once, Isolde had no immediate answer. A servant entered with water. Behind him came Mr. Graves, Alistair's butler, who must have accompanied the household papers to Blackwood House. His face darkened when he saw his master. "My lord, water," Eleanor said, "and send for Lord Blackwood's physician." Alistair tried to protest. She looked back at him at last. "Do not be proud at me, even his weakened state." Something flickered in his eyes. Something dangerously close to warmth. He accepted the water. The room watched. The dynamic had changed completely. Alistair Wycliffe, feared by creditors and obeyed by men, stood unsteady beside the mantel, and Eleanor, once abandoned before a hungry church, stood between him and ruin. No one would forget it. Isolde seemed to understand that at the same moment. Her power had always depended on appearing breakable beside someone stronger, but Eleanor had denied her the role. She had not screamed, had not wept, had not run. She had observed, named, exposed, and now the room that was meant to bury her marriage had become the room where she claimed it. Lord Blackwood turned to Isolde, his voice cold. "Lady Isolde, you will retire to your chamber. My housekeeper will attend you until arrangements are made for your departure in the morning." Her face went white. "You cannot mean to treat me like a criminal." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "Only like a woman who has finally been seen." Isolde looked at her. Hatred shone through the softness now. Pure, undressed. "Do not think you have won him," she whispered. The room heard enough, not all enough. Eleanor held her gaze. "I did not come here to win a man. I came here because you tried to destroy my husband. My husband." The words left her before she could measure them. Alistair heard. His eyes moved to her face. The entire room seemed to fall away for one private heartbeat. Then Isolde was led out, not dragged. That would have been too dramatic. Simply escorted, and somehow that was worse. Her performance ended not with thunder, but with footsteps fading down a corridor. The guests began murmuring at once, but not as they had before. This was not hunger, it was recalculation. The abandoned bride had not merely survived scandal. She had mastered the room that tried to repeat it. Lord Ashbourne approached Eleanor and bowed deeply. "Lady Wycliffe," he said, "you have my admiration." Lady Rosamond came to her side and took her hand. "You were extraordinary." Eleanor barely heard them, because behind her Alistair swayed. But she turned at once. "Enough," she said. "He needs air and quiet, Mr." Graves and Lord Ashbourne helped Alistair to a smaller adjoining chamber. Eleanor followed, ignoring the eyes upon her back. Let them look for once. They had earned nothing from her pain. In the quiet sitting room beyond, Alistair was seated near the fire. His color had not fully returned. His usual control remained damaged at the edges, and that frightened Eleanor more than the trap had. Mr. Graves stood nearby, stiff with worry. "The physician is coming, my lady." "Thank you," Eleanor said. Her voice was, her hands were not. When the others stepped aside, she moved closer to Alistair. "You should not have gone alone." Eyes opened slowly. "That is not an answer. No." Even weakened. Still honest enough to irritate her, she knelt beside his chair before remembering she was in a gown fit for a musicale, not a sick room. It did not matter. He looked at her with an expression stripped of its usual armor. "You believe me." The words were low, almost rough. Eleanor's throat tightened. "No," he said. His gaze held hers. "You looked at me." She could not answer. Because he was right. The evidence had mattered. But before the glass, before the note, before the shawl, there had been his face when he saw her. Not guilt, relief. She had known then. Perhaps she had known even before. Alistair's hand moved slightly on the arm of the chair. Not reaching, never demanding. But Eleanor placed her hand over his. His fingers were cold beneath hers, his eyes to their joined hands. Then closed. For the first time since she had known him, the ruthless Viscount looked tired of being ruthless. The physician arrived. The examination was brief and discreet. "Something had been placed in the wine," he said, "enough to disorient." Not enough to do lasting harm if properly treated. Rest, water, and close watch were required. Close watch, Eleanor remained. The house quieted around them. The scandal moved elsewhere through corridors and bedrooms and hastily written letters, but in that small room there was only firelight, rain, and the man she had almost lost to a lie. Alistair stirred. Eleanor sat beside him, her shawl around her shoulders, one candle burning low on the table. For a moment he seemed unsure where he was, then he saw her. "You're not Lady Wycliffe. Not my wife, Eleanor." The name came without armor, without strategy, without restraint. Something in her heart gave way quietly. She leaned closer. "I am here." His gaze softened in a way she had not known his face could allow. "You should not have had to defend me." A faint, aching smile touched her mouth. "You defended me before a church full of wolves. Allow me one sitting room." His eyes closed again, but not before she saw it. A tenderness he was too weakened to hide. The candle burned lower. Rain tapped against the windows of Blackwood House. Somewhere beneath the same roof, power lay broken among whispers of her own making. Julian had seen the truth too late. Society had seen Eleanor clearly at last. But Eleanor saw only the man in the chair beside her, the man who had married her at the altar, the man who had bought her father's debts in secret, the man who had warned her against traps, the man who had looked at her through confusion and found relief. She sat beside him until dawn began to pale the windows. And as the first grey light entered the room, Eleanor understood the danger Isolde had seen before she had. She loved him. Not because he had saved her, not because his name protected her, not because society feared him. She loved him because beneath the ruthless Viscount's cold command was a man who had been gentle with her dignity when the world had tried to tear it. And that realization frightened her more than scandal, because 1 year had been their bargain. But love did not know how to end politely when the contract expired. Morning came quietly to Blackwood House, not peacefully. Quietly. There was a difference. Peace belonged to houses where nothing shameful had happened beneath candlelight. Quiet belonged to houses where servants had been ordered to step softly, where doors closed with unusual care, and where every guest had awakened knowing the scandal of the previous night had not been a dream. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady grey rhythm. The sky outside was the colour of old pewter in the breakfast room. Places had been set for guests who did not appear. Tea cooled in silver pots. Toast sat untouched beneath linen covers. Conversation, when attempted, collapsed beneath the weight of what everyone wished to discuss, and no one dared name too directly. Lady Isolde Ravenshaw was leaving. That was the official version. She had taken unwell after a distressing misunderstanding and would depart early for the sake of rest. But no one believed it, not the servants, not the guests, not Lord Blackwood, whose politeness had sharpened overnight into something colder. By noon, every person of consequence in the county would know that Lady Isolde had been escorted from the west sitting room after attempting to stage a compromising scene with Viscount Wycliffe. By evening the story would grow details of its own, but this time, Eleanor was not the woman being carried by the current of gossip. This time she had directed the tide. She sat in a small morning room beside the library where Alistair had been ordered to rest. The physician had come again at dawn and declared the Viscount much improved. Whatever had been slipped into his wine had begun to leave his system, though fatigue still shadowed his face. Alistair hated being seen weakened. That much was obvious. He sat in a high-backed chair near the fire, dressed properly despite the hour, his posture too controlled for a man instructed to rest. A blanket lay unused across the footstool, where Eleanor had placed it twice and he had ignored it twice. She sat opposite him with a cup of tea in her hands. Neither had spoken much. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. The night before sat between them like a third presence, Isolde's trap, Eleanor's defense. Alistair murmuring her name in a voice stripped of armor, and the realization Eleanor had not been able to push away since dawn. She loved him. The knowledge had not arrived like music. It had arrived like surrender. Terrible, quiet, certain. She loved Alistair Wycliffe, the ruthless Viscount, the man society feared, the man who had married her before a church full of wolves, the man who had bought her father's debts in secret and never asked to be thanked, the man who had offered her 1 year because he believed freedom mattered more than possession. And perhaps that was why the love hurt, because their marriage had been a bargain. 1 year, then if she wished, he would arrange a separate life, a respectable distance, a polite ending, a clean conclusion to an arrangement that no longer felt clean at all. Alistair looked at her over the rim of his untouched tea. "You have not slept. I was drugged, and I was terrified." The words left her before she could stop them. Alistair went still. The fire shifted in the grate. Eleanor looked down at her cup, annoyed by the other front of her fingers. "I beg your pardon." "Do not." His voice was low. She looked up. His face was guarded again, but not fully. Fatigue had softened the edges of his control. Or perhaps the night had simply made hiding less possible. "I should have listened to you," he said. Yes, a faint flicker crossed his eyes. You do not intend to comfort me with denial, no, good. Despite herself, her mouth almost smiled. Then the moment faded beneath the weight of truth. Before either of them could speak again, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Graves entered. Lady Wycliffe. Lord Julian requests a private word. The room tightened. Alistair's hand closed around the chair arm. Eleanor set down her cup. Yes. Alistair looked at her. Eleanor. The sound of her name in his voice almost undid her. Not because it was commanding. Because it was concerned. She stood. He owes me words he can no longer hide behind. I would rather hear them now, in daylight, than allow them to follow us home. Alistair's jaw tightened. No, she said, softly. You will not. His eyes sharpened. She held his gaze. If I am to stop being the woman abandoned at the altar, I must be allowed to close that door myself. For a moment, he looked as though he would argue. Then something in him yielded. Not easily, never easily, but with respect he looked to Mr. Graves. Leave the door open. Eleanor turned back to him. Alistair. He exhaled once through his nose. Fine. Half open. She almost smiled again. Mr. Graves bowed and withdrew. A moment later, Julian entered. He looked older than he had at the wedding, not by years, by understanding. His golden charm had not disappeared, but it no longer seemed bright enough to hide him. His face was pale. His eyes were tired. Shame sat on him badly, like a coat he had never learned to wear. He stopped several feet from Eleanor and bowed. Lady Wycliffe. This time, he used her title first. That mattered. Not enough to heal anything, but enough to show he had finally learned where the boundary lay. Lord Julian. He glanced toward Alistair. His brother remained seated by the fire, expression unreadable. Julian swallowed. I had hoped to speak to Lady Wycliffe alone. You may hope for many things, Alistair said. Eleanor lifted one hand gently. Alistair. He said nothing more. You will not take much of your time. No, Eleanor said, you will not. The old Julian might have smiled at that, might have softened it with some clever phrase. This Julian simply nodded. I came to apologize. The words hung in the room. Late, necessary. I know that no apology can alter what I did. I know I left you before witnesses. I know I made your pain public because I was too weak to face my own confusion privately. Eleanor listened without speaking. Julian's voice roughened. I believed Isolde needed me. Perhaps some part of me wanted to believe it. She knew how to command my guilt. She knew how to make leaving you feel for one terrible hour like an act of mercy instead of cowardice. But it was cowardice. Alistair did not move. Eleanor did not either. Julian continued. I told myself I never meant to destroy you, but intention is not innocence. You taught me that. Eleanor felt the words settle between them. He had listened too late. But he had listened. I am sorry, he said. For the church, for the letter. For saying your name as though I still had a right to it. For asking whether your marriage could be undone. As if your life were an error I might correct once I felt remorse. His eyes lifted to hers. I was selfish. I thought regret made me deserving of forgiveness. Regret is only the beginning of honesty, Eleanor said quietly. It is not the price of return. Julian nodded, his face tightening. I know that now. A silence. Then he asked the question she had known was coming. Is there any path back to what we were meant to have? Alistair's hand tightened on the chair. Eleanor felt it without looking. She took a breath. There had been a time when that question would have shattered her. A time when she would have searched herself for old affection, old duty, old expectations. A time when she might have mistaken pity for tenderness and sorrow for love. Not now. What we were meant to have, she said, was never as strong as what happened to us. Julian closed his eyes briefly. Eleanor continued gently but firmly. Our arrangement was suitable, respectable, useful, perhaps even kind in moments, but it was not love strong enough to withstand fear. You wanted me because I was convenient to your future, forgiving to your faults, and easy to disappoint. He flinched, but he did not deny it. You are not a wicked man, Julian. That is almost the tragedy of you. Wickedness would be easier to hate. You are charming, regretful, often kind, and too easily led by whatever emotion flatters you most. His face crumpled slightly. Eleanor's voice softened. You did not choose me when choosing me cost you courage. Her gaze moved, without permission, toward Alistair. He was watching her now, still, silent, burning with something or say. Eleanor looked back at Julian. Your brother did. The words landed with finality. As Julian followed her gaze, for one moment the brothers looked at each other. So much history passed between them that Eleanor felt she was witnessing a language older than speech. Then Julian bowed his head. I see. His voice was quiet, broken, perhaps accepting. I hope he deserves you better than I did. Alistair spoke then. I intend to. The words were simple, no performance, no triumph. Julian looked at him with a pain that was no longer jealousy alone. Perhaps love for his brother lived there too, buried beneath rivalry and shame. I hope you do, he said. Then he bowed to Eleanor one final time. Not as a former groom, not as a man asking to be remembered, as one acknowledging the woman he had lost by failing to be brave enough to keep her. Lady Wycliffe, Lord Julian, he left. The door closed softly behind him. For several seconds the room did not move. Then Eleanor turned toward Alistair. He looked at her as though she had placed something priceless in his hands, and he did not trust himself to hold. "You should rest," she said, because her heart was suddenly too loud. "I am finished resting. You are not. I am finished pretending weakness is improved by sitting still while my wife fights every battle in the room. My wife." Her breath caught. There was pride in it now, not possession. Pride it hurt because she loved him, and because she did not know whether he wanted her beyond the bargain that had saved her. Eleanor walked to the window. Rain streaked the glass. Beyond it the gardens blurred silver and green. "1 year," she said. Behind her the fire cracked. Alistair said nothing. She continued, forcing steadiness into her voice. "That was our agreement. 1 year before I could choose a separate life if I wished." Yes, the word was quiet. Painfully so. She turned. Alistair went still, all of him, not merely his face. His whole body seemed to lock around the sentence. Eleanor pressed on before courage failed her. "You have done enough, more than enough. You saved me publicly, you protected my family. You exposed Isolde without ever needing to boast of what you suspected. You gave me your name when mine was being torn apart." Her throat tightened. "I will not trap you in a marriage built from my disaster." His expression changed then. Not anger was hurt, deep, immediate, unguarded hurt. "Trap me," she hated the sound of it in his voice. "I know you married me because Julian left, because honor required repair, because someone had to stop society from feeding on my ruin. But you should not be bound forever to a woman you rescued in a moment of crisis." Alistair rose, too quickly. He steadied himself against the chair, but his eyes never left hers. "Do you believe that?" Eleanor's composure trembled. "What else am I meant to believe? The truth. Then give it to me." Silence. For the first time since she had known him, Alistair Wycliffe looked afraid. Not of creditors, not of scandal, not of society, of her. Of what she might do with the truth once he placed it before her. He walked toward her slowly, stopping far enough away to respect the space between them, close enough that she could see the storm in his eyes. "I did not marry you because Julian left." Her breath stopped. He continued. "I married you because, for one blessed moment, the world gave me the right to choose you." Eleanor stared at him. The room seemed to fall away. The rain, the fire, Blackwood House, everything. Alistair's voice was low, but every word carried the weight of years. "I loved you before the altar." Her heart struck hard against her ribs. "Before?" she whispered. "Yes." He looked away for 1 second, as if shame and relief were fighting within him. "The first time I truly saw you was at Lord Ashbourne's dinner 2 years ago. Lady Mercer had humiliated her companion over a spilled glass. Everyone heard. Everyone pretended not to. You did not," Eleanor remembered faintly. "A crowded dinner, a trembling young companion, a stain on pale muslin. A room full of people too politer," Eleanor said. "You defended her," Alistair replied. "Quietly, completely. You made it impossible for the room to continue enjoying her shame, and afterward, when no one thanked you, you smiled as though kindness did not require applause." His voice roughened. "I remembered that." Eleanor's eyes stung. "I did not know. No. You were never meant to know." "Why?" His mouth tightened. "Because you were intended for Julian. Because my brother was charming and suitable and chosen. Because I had spent my life being useful where I could not be wanted." The words broke something in her. "Alistair, I bought your father's debts because I could not bear watching men make a noose from your loyalty. I came to the wedding because I feared Julian would fail you. I did not know how. I only knew my brother had always mistaken impulse for feeling." He drew a long breath. "When that letter arrived, I hated him, not because he embarrassed the Wycliffes, not because society watched, because he had placed you in the one position I had sworn privately and uselessly never to see you in." His eyes held hers. "Powerless before people who wanted your pain." A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek. She did not wipe it away. Alistair saw it and looked as though it wounded him. "I offered 1 year because I would not make my love another prison," he said. "You had been given no fair choice that day. Not by Julian, not by your father's debts, not by society, and not by me. If you wished to leave, I needed you to know that I would let you. You would have let me go." His voice lowered. "It would have ruined me." That was the confession that undid her. Not the love, not even the years of silence. The fact that he would have opened the door anyway. Eleanor stepped closer. "You foolish man." His brows drew together faintly. She laughed through tears. Softly, unsteadily. "You ruthless, impossible, honorable, foolish man." For 1 moment he looked almost lost. Then Eleanor reached for his hand and placed it against her own chest over her heart. "No impropriety, no spectacle, only truth. I was going to release you because I love you." Alistair did not move. At first she thought he had not understood. Then his face changed. Not dramatically, not in a way the tongue would recognize, but Eleanor saw the moment contrailed him. His eyes closed briefly. When he opened them again, the ruthless Viscount was still there, but so was the man beneath him, bare, astonished. "A slave, say it again," he said. Her smile trembled. "I love you." His hand turned beneath hers, fingers closing carefully around her own, as always careful, even now. Especially now. Eleanor. Her name sounded like gratitude. Like a vow, he bent his head until his forehead rested against hers. Her wrist tender, clean, filled with all the words they had buried beneath duty, bargain, fear, and pride for a long moment. They stayed that way. No altar, no society waiting to feast, only a man and woman who had entered marriage by scandal and found, within its guarded walls, something truer than either had dared ask for. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. There will be no one-year bargain. No separate life. Never. His fingers tightened around hers. And if I become insufferable? You already are. A faint sound left him, not quite a laugh, but close enough to feel like sunlight entering a shuttered room. Eleanor smiled. And for the first time since St. Bartholomew's, happiness did not feel like a dangerous thing. It felt earned. Weeks later, London received them. By then, Isolde Ravenshaw's name had become a caution whispered behind fans, not ruined by Eleanor's cruelty, ruined by her own design. The Tun could forgive many things. It rarely forgave a failed performance once the mechanism had been exposed. Julian returned to society more quietly, less golden, less certain. He bowed when courtesy required and did not approach unless invited. And Eleanor Wycliffe entered Lady Castlemere's London ball on her husband's arm. This ballroom was grander than Lady Hartwell's, brighter, more crowded. The chandeliers played above silk, satin, jewels, uniforms, flowers, and ambition. The air hummed with voices. Every mirror doubled the spectacle. Every eye turned when the Wycliffes appeared at the entrance. Once, Eleanor would have braced herself for judgment. Now she understood something society worked hard to hide. A room only had power over a woman if she accepted its verdict before entering. Eleanor did not. She wore silver again. Not the pale silver of uncertainty, a deeper silver luminous beneath candlelight, threaded with pearl and quiet authority. Her hair was swept elegantly from her face. At her throat rested the Wycliffe diamonds, old and severe and magnificent. Beside her, Alistair wore black. Always black, but that night the severity did not make him seem distant. It made him seem certain. His hand rested over hers on his arm, not for support, for unity. The room saw it, and this time the whispers did not sound like hunger. They sounded like surrender. Lady Hartwell bowed her head. Lord Blackwood smiled with genuine respect. Lady Rosamond came forward and kissed Eleanor's cheek. Then the room shifted again. Julian stood near the far side of the ballroom for a moment. Eleanor saw the past as it might have been. A charming husband, a suitable life, a gentle disappointment spread across years. Then Julian bowed. Deeply, publicly, not to his brother, to her. It was not an apology spoken aloud. It did not need to be. Eleanor inclined her head, accepted. Finished. Beside her, Alistair said quietly, "Are you well?" She looked up at him. "Yes, truly, truly." His gaze softened, still private, still guarded from the room. But hers to recognize now. The Modista turned toward her. "Lady Wycliffe," he said, his voice carrying just enough for those nearest to hear. "Dance with your husband?" There it was, my wife. Her husband. No shame. No bargain, no rescue being repaid, only pride. Placed a hand in his. "With pleasure, Lord Wycliffe." They moved onto the floor. The crowd parted, not because they feared scandal, because they were witnessing the end of one story and the beginning of another. The waltz began. Alistair led with the same careful discipline she had learned to trust. He did not crowd her, did not display her, did not claim her like a prize. He danced with her as though she were his equal, as though room mattered less than the hand in his. As they turned beneath the chandeliers, Eleanor saw their reflection in the tall mirrors. Alistair in black, Eleanor in silver, the ruthless Viscount and the bride he had chosen. Not at last, first, for she understood now. The day she thought she had lost everything was not the day her life ended. It was the day false promises were stripped away, the day pity failed to own her, the day society came to witness her ruin and instead watched a feared man rise from the pews, cross the aisle, and offer her a name no one could mock. Julian had left her at the altar, but Alistair had chosen her in front of the world, and Eleanor, who had once believed dignity meant enduring pain quietly, now knew better. Dignity was not silence, love was not convenience. And being chosen was not the same as being saved. Sometimes the woman left standing alone before the altar did not become a tragedy. Sometimes she became untouchable. Sometimes she became beloved, and sometimes the most ruthless man in the room was the only one brave enough to love her, gently. The music carried them on, the chandeliers burned bright above them, and as Viscount Alistair Wycliffe looked at his wife with unmistakable pride, Eleanor smiled, not for society, not for victory, for the man who had chosen her when choosing her cost him everything he had spent a lifetime pretending not to need, for the life that had begun in scandal and ended in devotion, for the truth that finally stood clear beneath every candle in the room. She had not been abandoned. She had been discarded, chosen, not ruined, restored, and the Tun, which had once come to watch Lady Eleanor Whitmore fall, now watched Lady Eleanor Wycliffe dance as though no whisper in England could ever touch her again.